haven't got, never, I gotta have that stuff.
And they're live right now.
Anyway, they come back and,
So I will call to order the study session of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, November 20th, 2019. Welcome, everyone. This is a study session and a workshop for the new cellular ordinance. Our staff has put together a nice set of presentations to inform both the public and the Planning Commission. And tonight, obviously, we've got people who are going to want to speak tonight and are very interested in this. So we'll go through the presentations first, and I'll ask the Planning Commission, to the best of your ability, hold your questions until we get to the end of the presentations, just for the sake of alacrity. And then the Planning Commission will ask some questions, and then we'll open it up for public comment. And towards the end, the Planning Commission will have some discussion to provide some input to staff if necessary. All right? So, Katie, would you like, well, I'll let you talk about the tables that are outside for everyone. So why don't you kick us off?
Sure thing. So yes, we've planned a great workshop today. Afterwards, once we've concluded the meeting portion with all the public comment that we can fit, we do have tables outside. Staff will be there with the attorney, and some of our other presenters will be out there as well as a few of the wireless carriers, representatives from the wireless industry who have agreed to participate. So if there's any other questions that didn't get answered, or you just want to get some more information, feel free to take advantage of that. The tables are all set up over on that side of the building under the awning, so hopefully we don't get too wet. Without further ado, let me just pull up my presentation here. For those who don't know yet, I'm Katie Crockett, Associate Planner here at the City. Thank you for joining us this evening. Before I dig into some key points of our ordinance, for small cells, I want to give an overview of kind of where we are in the process. The ordinance and other accompanying documents are currently being developed by staff. In October, the Design Review Subcommittee reviewed the Design and Development Standards document. Based on feedback from the wireless industry, the public, and the discussion and comments of the DRSC, modifications have been made, and the resulting documents have been posted for public review and comment. Following this workshop today, staff will again incorporate changes as needed and present the revised draft to the Planning Commission. It is currently scheduled for December 18th. That is where an actual decision would be made, in this case in the form of a recommendation to the City Council. Staff's goals in developing the ordinance have been to protect aesthetics of the city, to develop realistic locational and design regulations, to minimize the number of exceptions requested, and to minimize discretion involved by utilizing objective locational and design criteria to facilitate compliance with the restrictive shot clocks and fee limitations that are imposed on us. To that end, the wireless ordinance establishes a new permit type, a wireless permit, which would be required for all small cell facilities. Small cell facilities would be those meeting the definition included in the ordinance. Because of the restrictive 60 or 90-day shot clocks for processing small cell facilities, the standard discretionary application process used, such as for CUPs or variances, cannot be used. The wireless permit process is administrative, meaning there's no public hearing. The authority on wireless permits as currently drafted is the city planner. This administrative process is consistent with many small cell ordinances and policies, including the city of Encinitas. If I refer to Encinitas a bit, it's because they recently adopted a city council policy regulating small cells that several members of the public have been interested in and put forth as what we should use as a model for our own. So as I said, they also have administrative review. Where we differ with them is in the appeals procedure. Our appeals are administrative, as currently drafted, to the Community Development Director. Administrative appeals are common for small cell appeals, and some jurisdictions do not allow appeals at all. This is due to the restrictive shot clocks and the fact that appeals are included in those shot clock timeframes. This means that the city actually has less than 60 or 90 days to make our initial our first decision, because we have to count on an appeal occurring. How would you know if you wanted to file an appeal? We do have a notice requirement. Not all cities do, and Encinitas does. Our notice is a notice of date of decision. In order to meet shot clocks, this was what staff felt made the most sense. It's again a 300-foot radius mailing, and the notice would include, this application was filed, and here's the date a decision will be made. It will be posted on the city's website on that date, or you could call or email, and we can provide you with a determination. And then appeals have to be filed within 2 business days of the city planner's determination. Again, this is to meet shot clock requirements.
Katie, may I interrupt you? 300-foot radius mailing. In some sensitive use, we propose to have more than 300 feet. Just spacing. In that case, are we going to expand that mailing?
In what did we propose to
For
have?
example, if a small cell in your proposed ordinance, spacing to school would be 500?
So those are so I'll get to that in a minute. The 300-foot radius is for the notices. So notice would go out to all property owners within 300 feet of the proposed site.
Okay.
And I'll just request of the planning commissioners, again, if you can, hold your questions until after all the presentations have been made, because we're likely to have a lot of public input, and we want to get to that as well. Okay, thank you, Katie.
So the next kind of popular topic to discuss is separation requirements. As currently drafted, we have 500 feet from schools. These are measured from property line, and that has been clarified in the standards from the DRSC meeting. 300 feet from any other cell site, that includes macro sites and small cells, measured obviously from site to site, and 100 feet from any residences. Again, this is measured from property line and not the structure. So the reason these radiuses were chosen is because this leaves, staff feels, an adequate amount of space, available locations for carriers to locate. And so to that end, we did put together some maps. And so what you're seeing here, residential properties are in dark gray, parks are in green, schools are in blue, and mixed use, where you may also have residential units, are in purple. And then we added buffers around those. So what you see on this map is 100 feet from residential and 500 feet from schools as drafted. So the white areas you can see are areas that would be available for small cell installations without requesting an exception. Staff feels this does still leave quite a few of our arterials available, which is where utilities are entitled to go. Sorry, it's taking a minute to load there. So if we then go to, say, about 1,000 feet, you can see the difference. So let me go here and do 1,000 feet then. Parks, I'll take that one off. Schools, there we go. All right, so now if I zoom out on here, you'll see that the white would, at 1,000 feet radius for both, be what is left. There we go. And so you can see it's essentially a few open space areas, as well as in here in the Rancho San Clemente Business Park area. So, and open space areas, while they're interesting and sometimes prime candidates for macro sites, they're not the best for these small cells, because the whole design of small cells is that they're closer to the end user. So that's kind of the thinking behind that. We also didn't include parks, because parks are actually included as preferred sites in the 2008 wireless master plan that the city adopted in 2008. And so we didn't want to conflict with an existing policy document. That said, the city is planning to update our wireless master plan, so that's something that we could look at in the future as we go into that process. So other common comments we've received that were either already in there or have been incorporated since DRSC. Very high fire hazard severity zones are included in the list of discouraged locations. Noise limitations, the standards already list generators are prohibited, and that would be probably the loudest potential for noise. And all development is always subject to the noise ordinance, so that's somewhat addressed that way. Requiring compliance with RF exposure. This is included in the definition of small cells and included in the conditions of approval and in the annual certification, which is required in the conditions of approval as well. Abandonment procedures, that is in the standard conditions, so that would specify that the site has to be removed when it's no longer in use. Annual certification, like I mentioned, that was added to the standard conditions. Distances to residences and schools are measured from property line. We got a lot of comments that, my yard, though, is closer than my house. So that was taken into consideration. Compliance with ADA and the Fair Housing Act, that would be covered in Standard Condition 1. Landscaping provisions are also covered in the design and development standards. Insurance, that's included in the standard conditions and required for encroachment permits by Public Works as well, just as a matter of course. We are also planning on adding a few things. They just didn't make it for this November draft. That would be requiring the fire chief approval of sites in very high fire hazard severity zones. That'll be included as a condition. The ordinance, there's been some interest in the ordinance being retroactively applied to pending applications. Current case law would seem to support that, at least in some measure, and so we're working on that with the city attorney. The automatic withdrawal of applications deemed incomplete and not resubmitted within 90 days. The request from the public was 60, but we felt 90 was just more reasonable. Prohibition on light emissions and signs on small cell facilities, that will be included in the design standards. And permit revocation will be included in standard conditions as well, just to clarify that that is a possibility. So I could talk about this for a very, very long time, but we have some other great presenters here. One thing I want to note before we move on is that staff does plan to compile a list of the comments we've received with responses to those comments, because staff can't incorporate every comment, but we don't want people to think that we have not heard or are just ignoring them, but there's reasons for why we've drafted it the way we did. And as well, that would inform then the Planning Commission and the City Council on whether they think adjustments need to be made based on those responses. So next up on the agenda was going to be a regulatory framework presentation from Andrew McCardle, but since we had a very comprehensive presentation at a prior study session, and that presentation is available online, I think we're going to skip that so we can get to some of our other presenters and make sure we reserve time for public comment. But Andrew is here, so during Q&A, if any questions come up, please feel free to ask. So next up is Mike Pettis. He is a member of the South Orange Amateur Radio Association, and he has volunteered to come here and share with us some of his expertise. Don't let that amateur in his title fool you. So give me one sec to pull that up. Here's Mike. You can take it away.
Just before you speak, I just wanted to ask people if anyone is planning to address the Planning Commission tonight, if you could get one of those green cards in the back and fill it out and hand it in to our Secretary Eileen here so that we can call you when the time comes. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am presenting tonight an analysis of the small cell installations for San Clemente. I did this a number of years ago when I was living up in the
the San Jose, Silicon Valley area. And I'm kind of used to presenting about wireless to City Council. I did it for San Francisco, San Mateo, Cupertino back in the 90s, so I've done this before. It's a different situation now because we're dealing with small cells, and that's kind of a new technology in the last 5 years or so. Mike Pettis is my name. I'm a RF wireless engineer. I've been one of my whole career. The IEEE, if you don't know what that is, it's the Institute of Electrical Electronic Engineers. It's an international organization, which I'll talk more about later. I'm a member. That's my professional organization. My non-professional organization is the ARRL, Amateur Radio Relay League. That's what I do for a hobby. So I'm into wireless both professionally and non-professionally. And I hit the button here, and it works great. Radio frequency energy, or RF, as you may have heard the acronym, is electromagnetic energy. And it comes in all different forms. What you're familiar with, probably visible light. This is electromagnetic radiation. Infrared heat, if you feel heat from a fire or you out in the sun, that's warmth that you feel, that's infrared. Ultraviolet radiation, that's what gives you sunburns if you stay out in the sun too long. But you can't see it. You can't see infrared. You can't see ultraviolet. A microwave oven, that's electromagnetic energy that cooks food. FM AM broadcast, you're probably very familiar with. That's electromagnetic energy. And finally, the final bullet here is what we're talking about today, which is cellular radio. Electromagnetic energy spans a large spectrum of frequencies, and that's why we call it the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is a chart that's been used quite often. I actually got this from the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which if anyone's never been there and they have a chance to visit it sometime, it's a great place for kids and teaching science. And what I wanted to show on here was the electromagnetic spectrum expands from all the way down to very, very low frequencies, like that's used, your AC power line is at 60 hertz. Well, that can also radiate in terms of electromagnetic radiation, all the way up through radio waves, microwaves, and then infrared. And then you see visible light, that little slice of the rainbow there, kind of over to the right. That's what we can see in terms of electromagnetic radiation. That's what our eyes are sensitive to. This is all visible light. Then above that's ultraviolet. Then we get into X-rays and gamma rays. Anyway, it's, as I tell people that are just being introduced to the topic, it's all the same stuff. Whether it's light, heat, ultraviolet, radio waves, cellular radio, it's all the same type of energy. It's just different frequencies, which means different wavelengths. So the thing you probably heard about is the 4G cellular mobile phone frequencies. I've showed that on the first little cut of yellow here. Anywhere from about 700 megahertz up to about 5 gigahertz is used for mobile phone communications. And the proposed new frequencies, you probably heard about 5G. That's just above that. It's up into the millimeter wave frequencies. And the other concept I wanted to touch on here was the concept of non-ionizing radiation and ionizing radiation. And there's a line. It's at about the ultraviolet spectrum, and frequencies above that line are ionizing. What does that mean? That means ionizing means that the energy can actually move an electron out of the atom. And it makes an ion. That's why it's called ionizing. That's why if you go lay in the sun for too long and you get a sunburn, you have a possible chance of getting cancer from a sunburn. That's because it's ionizing radiation. Below that line, it's non-ionizing radiation, so it can't happen. There's no interaction with matter, so to speak, or interaction with, you can't get a sunburn from warmth of a fire, and you can't get a sunburn from visible light. It has to be ultraviolet or higher in order for it to be ionizing. So I wanted to bring up those terms because you may have heard of this as you're looking into RF safety guidelines and maximum permissible exposures, and those types of things. Everything we're dealing with here in terms of mobile phones, small cells, even the proposed 5G, it's all well below that line, which is non-ionizing radiation. Now, I wanted to explain the source of the safety guidelines. The FCC adopted the safety guidelines in, I think, '96. It was actually started with the IEEE, Institute of Electronic Engineers, in '91. I participated on this formation of this standard back in '91, and it's been revised a couple times. The latest, I think, is 2005. It's about a 250-page document. It goes into the details of how these maximum permissible exposures were developed. And the IEEE is a non-commercial, it's a nonprofit organization, and it's international. There's about 420,000 engineers that are members of the IEEE. And I'm a proud member. I'm now a life member of this organization. And it's non-political, and it's global, and in my mind, it's very neutral. The FCC, which is a government organization, adopted the standards from the IEEE. That's how they set their guidelines. But this is the source. I just want everybody to know where it came from. And this is available online. Anybody can go get this information. What matters for RF safety? Okay. In terms of small cells, we're really talking about what's called maximum permissible exposure. And this is what was developed in that IEEE guide and that the FCC adopted. And for small cells, it's about 580 microwatts per square centimeter. So let me explain what all that gobbledygook means. RF power is measured in watts at the source, like a light bulb, 10-watt light bulb, 50-watt light bulb. The power at the cell transmitter, the small cell transmitter that's on the pole, is measured in watts, like it's a 5-watt or a 10-watt transmitter. Then the other part that matters for safety is the distance from that transmitter. How far away are you from the transmitter? The further you are away, the lower this number gets, okay? And the resulting RF power density is measured in watts per area. So if you're measuring, 10 watts and you go 100 feet away, it'll be very, very low because it spreads out like a bubble and decreases in power. And the FCC and the IEEE guideline for consumer safety for MPE is, again, about 580 microwatts per square centimeter. And that number, again, was developed out of the IEEE. And there's other ways to deal with RF safety. If you're talking about something where you're very close, like the cell phone on my belt, then they use a different standard. It's called specific absorption rate. And what they're looking for there is it enough power to heat? Is it enough power to warm up something, like in a microwave oven? That would be specific absorption rate. But for everything we're discussing tonight, it's MPE, or maximum permissible exposure. And one of the things that's just the physics of electromagnetic radiation, it happens with light, it happens with infrared, and it happens with radio waves. As you get further from the source, the power density decreases with distance, and it decreases, this will be the only math tonight, I promise, it decreases with the square of the distance. So if I'm 1 foot from the source and I have X amount of power density, if I go 4 feet from the source, I'm 1/16th that power density. If I go 10 feet from the source, I'm 1/100th of the power density. So it varies the square of the distance. And I use the analogies of dropping a rock into a pond of water, and you can see the ripples going out. Well, what happens? They get bigger and bigger and bigger and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because they decrease with distance. And like a bubble, as the bubble gets bigger, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. Finally, it pops. But what's happening there is that the density of the material, as it increases the distance, gets lower. So that same thing happens with radio waves. It's the square of the distance. And I wanted to do a comparison just so you can relate it to everyday experience. The FCC guidelines, 580 microwatts per square centimeter. On a sunny day in the summer at noon, the amount of power in terms of the same units of measure hitting the sidewalk or the dirt or your driveway is 100,000 microwatts per square centimeter. It's electromagnetic radiation, it's visible, it's infrared, it's ultraviolet, but it's much, much higher than the MPE guideline, just as a comparison. Okay, these are the proposed sites in San Clemente, 5 of them. I believe I have that right. I got this information from, yes. And each one of them has a specific distance to the nearest property line. I believe that's the criteria. And what I did was I did a quick analysis on a spreadsheet, and what I used as the sources of the power were these radio base stations. And I believe it'll either be both or one of these radios that'll be on the pole, and then also the antenna that will be on the pole. So all of this counts in terms of calculating this MPE level, the power of the radios, the gain of the antenna. And this is my spreadsheet, and what I did was I took each site with the distance to the property line, site 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have it in feet and meters there, and then I used the frequencies that would be used, which are the ones not in blue. The ones in blue are not being used in these particular radios for the small cells, but the ones in white are being used. And the only difference between them is how much antenna gain there is, and the more antenna gain there is, the higher the power coming out of the unit. So I did it from site 1 through site 5, and the numbers in red are the power densities in microwatts per square meter. And as you can see, these are all pretty low. In fact, on the order of 100 times lower than the MPE guideline. That's for these specific sites. If anyone wants to check my calculations, the spreadsheet's available. Anyone can take a look at it. And any colleagues that are in the wireless business can take a look at it. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. What's that?
Yes.
Yeah, Katie, can you provide that as a copy?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, let me just pull up this next presentation. Our next presenter is Lee Afflerbach. He is a principal engineer with, he's a telecommunications system engineer with Columbia Telecommunications. He's got nearly 40 years of experience. He has designed, tested, and planned dozens of wireless networks for municipal government, public safety, educational, and nonprofit clients. Notably, Lee and his company do not work for the wireless industry. This was very important to us and members of the public. And so, Lee, take it away. Just let me know when you want.
Okay, thanks. I will try to have no duplicity here, minimize it. You took 99% of my talk. No, I didn't really. Okay, great. 2 engineers in a row, you know. What an exciting evening that's going to be, huh? All right, so yeah, we work exclusively for local governments on these kinds of issues. Our job is to provide objective analysis, go through these processes, and often we work with the community and the providers to see if we can get some compromise of where we want to go. Let's go through this relatively quickly. I want to talk, what I want to focus on today is what are small cells, what's their role, why do we have them, what are some typical configurations. I will not hit the RF thing too much. I'll leave my slide rule away for the evening. Go next one. The genesis of this technology is, years ago, most of us remember cell towers. They were typically 150, 200 foot high, multiple carriers on them, and those are the days we had voice communications. Spacing on towers was generally about, and I have to be careful in this community because of all the hills and such you have here and caverns, but where I live in the eastern shore of Maryland, where we can see forever, typically they're spaced at 3-mile intervals. And this worked fine for voice communications. About a decade or so ago, the smartphones became popular, and like anything else, it just grew and grew and grew, and I don't even have to discuss that. But what I can tell you is that each of the carriers have a certain amount of RF spectrum, radio frequency spectrum. And the big limitation they have is that it only has so much capacity. As long as you have voice communication, it doesn't take a lot of capacity. But when you start downloading videos, and if you can't help but see this on TV where they want you to watch this, watch that, and watch video, and every kid in town's got 2 of these devices on them, it takes almost an infinite amount of capacity. So what the carriers face is the problem of really addressing their advertising. They tell you how fast it goes, and we all know that it doesn't go that fast. And what they're busy is catching up with that. So when the 4G service, which is we're going to talk about tonight, which is the current service. I hear a lot of talk about 5G. Most of the applications that I see, and I see a lot of them, they're all 4G applications. They're with current technology, and the goal is to get 4G doing what it's supposed to be doing. In other words, meeting the goals of what marketing has sold to the public. Let me just finish all that one. Okay. So you'll see that on a tower, typically, tower's 150 feet. The 4G services initially made their debut in the 700 megahertz band. The 700 megahertz band is the longest distance band, which sounds great, but if you're sharing it with somebody, when you have a certain amount of capacity and you have a lot of people, and that what it means, frankly, is it's not so good. So one of the first things they did was to decide, got the FCC to provide them more spectrum. And really what's happening now is a lot of spectrum that hasn't been used for years, for decades, signed for TV channels. We're now munching those all together, so-called packing those. And what we're doing now is providing new additional spectrum. But as fast as spectrum is freed up, the kids with the machines are keeping ahead of that. So we have a problem of how do we do this? Let's move to the next slide. And the next one here, what we have is, first thing had the commission, we provided some new bands, the so-called PCS band and the AWS band. These are higher frequency bands. They're greater capacity. They have more megahertz. That's the way we manufacture, we measure the system. And while that's great, one of the downsides is they do not have the range. So that what happens is on a macro site, if you start putting, we call these macro towers, by the way, if you start putting more and more antennas up there, that's fine, but they only go so far. Typically, the distances are a half or even a third of what the distances you get on a normal 700 megahertz system. Let's go to the next one. So the answer to that, engineers have always got a solution. We can always find another way to do it. What are we going to do? We're going to basically put small cells out there. These are basically small cells that fill in the gap, and they do 2 things. One is they provide an extended range on these higher frequencies, and the other thing that you see, notice, they segment the area. So now that if we have 5 cells serving the same area as one of these macro cells, in many cases, it's 30 or 40 of these small cells will serve the same general area. What that means is there's more capacity and they can reuse these frequencies. They're very expensive, this RF spectrum, and there isn't that much of it. So the engineers have to come up with, and the solution is the small cells. And a typical small cell, we'll go through the details on it, but a typical small cell that I see is generally on a utility pole or an existing structure. Now, before I started this presentation, I drove around town and I found a real shortage of utility poles. And I have a feeling that you're not going to be real happy to have equipment above ground either. That's another area that people are concerned about. So most of the systems that are being built right now by the carriers use existing structures. The most common existing structure is the utility pole. The second most common is existing lighting structures, okay? And then the third one is they put their own pole in there. But by and large, that is the last resort. Let's go to the next slide here. The FCC has set up rules that I would say are industry friendly. But what I mean by that is the shot clocks, the rules of what you can do. Basically, following their rules, you could almost put anything anywhere. And so to reading these over, and I'm not saying this is what it has to be, but these are the rules that are standing out there. We're talking about 50-foot heights as acceptable heights. We're talking about antennas of 3 cubic feet per antenna. And we're talking about this equipment boxes or equipment enclosures of up to 28 cubic feet. Normally, there's a lot of back push on this kind of thing. But we've got FAA requirements. It's normally not an issue with small cells because unless you're on an approach in front of the runway, 50 foot's not going to be an issue. What is an issue here, the last one, is the FCC guidelines for exposure, which my colleague here has more than covered, so I will not beat that to death. Next one. Okay, so all these cells are put out there, and you guessed it, they got to be connected somewhere. They come back to a central office. Typically, they come back to fiber. Most people don't realize it, but the fiber is going to have to be installed. Now, in many areas, the fiber may be there. There are other facilities there. But all of these are basically nothing more. And I want to make this very clear because there's a discussion about small cells and large cells. My examination of many, many of these systems, by and large, the exact same radios that are used in the macro cells are the same radios that are being used in the small cells. What's the difference? They bolt them on the pole instead of bolting them on a tower. The antennas are smaller, but the radios are the same. That should be pretty obvious because they're a generic commodity, maintenance and all those issues. There are smaller radios out there, but by and large, the industry likes to use the same radios, and in most of the systems that we work on, they are using the exact same radio. Next one. Okay, here's an example. I brought this. This is the most common example. I'm not saying you're doing that here, but you notice they use an existing pole. The equipment is bolted on the side here on the existing pole, and the antenna top is a single cylindrical antenna, typically 2 to 4 foot in height. Okay, and these antennas operate all of the radio bands. So in other words, rarely do you find multiple antennas in a small cell. What you find is an antenna that has been designed by the manufacturer to cover all of these frequencies, and we basically so-called diplex. That's an engineering word for we could use the same antenna. A typical antenna that's being used at these sites typically has roughly about 1/10 of the radiation gain that one of the large antennas has. If you look on a pole, the typical antennas are much larger. They have higher gain of narrower bandwidth. These antennas tend to be omnidirectional, and they tend to be relatively small in size. So the real problem we normally have is the equipment problem, because generally the antennas can be made to look on the poles acceptable. Now, that's not going to work here because you don't have utility poles, but I put this together a generic presentation so you understand the business model. You can be sure that if you have any poles, they will be number one. Next item. Okay, RF exposure. My role has been preempted here on that, so we don't have to go. Next one. Okay, same drawing, same idea. Yeah. Okay, the one thing that's important here, I use the same math. Notice it's the inverse square rule. One of the things that is important, that I want to point out here, is this it's not necessarily a simple matter, because you notice the chart there, that's out of the FCC regulations, and basically what it says is certain frequencies are more have to be restricted because they create body heat. Example, the spectrum in the 30 to 300 megahertz range, which is not involved here, is the area where it is most, you can see here myself, where it is most, where the limitation is, this is more restrictive. Now, why is that important? It's important to consider that when these antennas go out there, they're just one of many other items out there. You might be lucky enough to be next to an FM station or other stations. So normally when we're looking at this, we can't just look at this in isolation. We have to look at cumulative effects. And that's something we'll talk about later, not now, but when you get to the design stage. Next slide. All right, what is important, though, is on these systems is an understanding about the radiation. But people who come to these sessions have an interest in this. Many of them are concerned about RF emission. And our company, we deal with basically determining whether or not they're in compliance with the federal standards. I'm not a doctor, I'm an engineer. I crank numbers out. I can tell you what it is as far as the situation. I can't tell you if it's good for you, but I don't know if it's Roundup or if there's any problem there, but I can tell you what they are relative to the federal standards. Now, what is important, many people may say, well, gee, I guess the dangerous spot is right underneath the antenna. Well, it's not, because the radiation is directed outward away from the antenna. Actually, you probably have gone through this situation where you're going underneath a tower or something and you've gotten disconnected. You can see the tower. And that comes of one of two ways. Either you're disconnected as part of the switchover or the fact that there's very little signal. Because these antennas have very high gain out away from the antenna, but not down below. And that's sort of, the other thing, what we find though is that the concern that we have is not so much, it tends to be in the multi-story buildings. So these antennas, if they're 40 or 50 foot high, and you happen to be right next door to with a balcony sitting up there, you may not be too. So we always look at the analysis of not just what is the power at the antenna, below the antenna and side. We have to look at a very big picture. Next slide. I was driving around here, and I thought I was back in Palos Verde because they're one of our clients, and I almost felt like I was on the same roads, because it's a good example. There is that you may not be able to talk to a site real close, but you can get one to Santa Monica because you've got that what we call a clear path, a line of sight. And so in many areas, like in this community, it may be necessary to use directional antennas. The reason for the directional antennas is because you've got areas that you can't cover, or the areas you have to focus on. So they're not necessarily omnidirectional devices. Next one. And so typically, when we look at these applications, we try to get a good understanding of what they're trying to cover, are there other alternatives or such. But generally speaking, the issues to sum it up, the issues that we look at are, number one, are they in compliance with your standards that you're going to adopt? Are they in full compliance with the FCC standards? And are there issues that, and this is the one that I find most important, is as part of the review process, is there sort of accommodation that the vendor can come along with? For example, let me give you some examples. We'll have situations where there is pushback from the community for some reason, okay? It might be because of the actual location. It might be the fact that there's other units there in the community there. But what I have found is when you do come back to the companies, in many cases, they'll work with you as part of the planning commission to adjust these sites to try to deal with issues. Or, for example, where you have existing poles that you might want to use. So one of the things that is a good idea, particularly in a community like this, when I was driving through here, my immediate reaction was I would look at all the existing streetlights I would look at traffic signals and such, and maybe consider those as a priority to work with. I'm not telling them how to design their system, but I think it is a two-way street. What I have found, and I bring up Palos Verde, and any of you who've been following this is a perfectly good example. There has been a good working relationship developed between the Planning Commission and the public. Not everyone's going to be happy, and there's some pretty difficult meetings, but it does provide a process. And one of the things you have to remember about engineering is there is not one solution. There are multiple solutions. So in other words, we'll find sites, for example, we're dealing with one up in Napa right now where there was an objection to having the facility too close to a school. And after discussing this back and forth, the conclusion was that they could put two sites in and get the same coverage. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. In other words, we're not redesigning something, but we're looking at this and saying, well, what do you want to accomplish? What would be the more desirable way to go? Okay, well, I think that's yes. I'll be around for any questions and be happy to answer. I think that's all the energy you need for right now.
All right, thank you very much. And that's our last speaker.
That's the last speaker.
Great. So I want to open it up for a few minutes to the Planning Commission if you have any questions specifically for any of the speakers. Jason.
Yes, so Katie, thank you. Appreciate all the work that you've put in on this. I mean, this is impressive. So on the appeals process, some cities don't allow appeals. Is that what I heard you to say?
That's correct.
Okay. Any examples of those cities?
I can get you some. I don't want to misspeak here because I have done a lot of research on various cities. But yes, I can provide examples.
So why don't some of those cities, do you know why some of those cities don't allow an appeals process?
I would assume it's due to the shot clocks.
Okay, so they just don't want to have the appeals because it's going to run out the time.
Right.
Anyway, am I understanding that
Right.
correctly?
Yes.
And then you made reference to the 300-foot radius for the appeals. So I know that when I've inquired about appeals in the past, when you do an appeal, there's a fee that has to be paid for the mailings and all of that. Is that the case with an appeal of this as well?
So in terms of the actual mailing, what we're going to do to just comply with shot clocks is ask for 2 sets of envelopes. So we automatically have those available for the mailing. In terms of a fee, yes, there would be a fee for the appeal. That fee will have to be looked at and potentially set by resolution. It may be a different appeal fee than for a typical discretionary application, simply because there are limits set by the FCC for permitting fees.
Okay. And then the last speaker who was talking about I think the kind of the last example that was given, which was the redesign where you had you moved one cell site and you covered that with 2 cell sites instead of 1. So I guess I'm not sure how that would play in with the city's review of a cell site. So could you talk me through where something like that, let's say that we had a proposed cell site that was not an area that the city felt made sense, right, or within its discretion, how would you go about convincing a carrier to break that into 2 cell sites? Or I guess I'm curious about the mechanics of that.
Well, so some of that is accomplished through what we require to be submitted for the application. And we are still actually drilling that down. That's one of the pieces you'll notice is still missing is the application packet. So a lot of that will be covered in that. So we do still, even though one of our criteria for denial cannot be that there's no coverage gap or that it's the least intrusive means, we can still ask for that information to support, their claims that they kind of need the site for whatever reason. So a lot of that will be accomplished through what we ask for, and we are still working through what we need to ask for in order to make those decisions and have those discussions.
And we'll, after we have public comment, do you anticipate that we'll have a couple of minutes to circle back? Because I'm sure that'll provoke some questions we might have of Katie that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm reserving time at the end
Okay,
for a
thank
planning
you.
commission discussion and to give staff information.
Thank
So,
you, Katie.
Michael?
Yes. Okay, there's a lot of science here, obviously, a lot of information, and I think we'll definitely have things to talk about by the end of this discussion. But I have a question, I think, for Mr. Pettis, would probably be, of the two, you could probably both speak to this, but I'll just go with him since he touched on it first. A question about the IEEE standards that the FCC is used to develop their safety criteria, right? And that's all the licensees are obligated to operate at or below these thresholds of safety,
Right.
based on the IEEE's
Right.
information. Okay. Can you elaborate more on some of the separation requirements that are typical? So when we're looking at these RF reports that often come in with an application, those reports are generally prepared or should be prepared by a radiological engineer, a qualified licensed engineer, third party preferably. And the math that's used is based on what the IEEE has determined to be safe in terms of distance. So in those reports, we often see occupational and non-occupational exposure.
Correct.
Could you
Correct.
elaborate more on what that means?
Sure.
And what would be a typical distance that the IEEE would determine to be safe in terms of, non-occupational exposure versus an operational facility?
Right, right.
And lastly, the part that is most important is that the maximum gains that are used, the numbers that are used to determine that maximum exposure are pretty standard, and I would think that we would want that in every case so that we can see what the worst case scenario, so to speak,
Right.
would be.
Right.
Okay.
right.
So
Okay, to answer your first question, there's two categories called occupational and non-occupational. And non-occupational would mean like a general consumer that's not a radio engineer or anything like that. Occupational, and the reason they made these two categories is occupational levels are higher. The engineers know what they're doing, and they are allowed to be exposed to higher levels of power density in this case, and even specific absorption rates in this case. And usually what happens when there's an occupational limit, and it's MPE, it's basically an awareness level for the engineer that's working on a site. And where this comes into play is nothing in small cells gets to that high of a power level, but mainly like a broadcast transmitter on a mountaintop, where they're running, 10 kilowatts or 50 kilowatts. So these are significantly much higher powered radios. And the reason they, again, broke this into two categories is if you're just a person walking down the street and you're not an engineer, that's not occupational. You're not aware of anything, and usually that's a much lower level of MPE, because they don't want people just inadvertently, climbing up, you'd have to climb up the pole and get next to the antenna to even get near some of these levels. But for an engineer studies this, knows what the levels are, and they even have, for specific absorption rates, which is where you're very close to the antenna, they'll even have time limits. They'll say, if it's this much power, don't spend longer than 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and it's really for heating. It's just, am I going to heat up as a result of being too close to the power? Think of a microwave oven as the analogy. So those two categories are, again, for professional that are aware of what they're doing versus a consumer who's not aware. And you had a second part to your question.
Well, yes, typical distance we'd like to see, and what that looks like in terms of non-occupational.
For non-occupational, typical distances are on the order of that they consider safe. And again, I'm going with typical power levels that are, in this case, for small cells, which are 5 and 10 watt radios. If you're beyond 10 or 20 feet, you're fine in the non-occupational levels. And the last point you brought up was antenna gain, because that does affect how much focused RF power there is. What we typically do as engineers, and what I did on my analysis is, even though it's probably not going to be the maximum gain that the antenna can produce, but that's the numbers we use. I use worst case conservative levels when doing these analyses. In fact, I had both radios on at the same time. I had the antenna gain maximum. I turned everything up as high as it would go in terms of the specifications, so that it's a conservative analysis. And that's typically what engineers will do when they're, calculating these MPE levels.
Okay.
Let me add something.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, the units that we've been looking at in other cities in California, typically the equipment, as I mentioned to you earlier, uses the same radios. So the radios that you were showing me here are quite a bit lower in power. The typical radio that we see is a 160-watt radio. The effective radiating power on these systems can be up to 2,500 watts, 2.5 kilowatts. To get to the FCC level underneath, that's not a problem. Typically, it's at 1% or so for a 6-foot person. The problem is in the horizontal direction. Typically, what we see is that the 100% level is reached at about 25 feet. So in other words, be 25 feet away. Now that's, I'm quoting those numbers based on the latest round of 40 sites that we looked over for one of the clients here. So it is something that does need to be looked at. It is significant. Again, they're using generally the same radios that they used in the macro sites.
Okay, so we're assuming high gain on the antennas at 25 feet, whether it's occupational or non-occupational, it's 25 feet, and then that starts to drop off.
Well, 25 feet is for non-occupational. That's for it's a 5-to-1 ratio, so you can actually bring that back up. But it's significant, and particularly in older cities. We do the engineering for Palo Alto, and a lot of those antennas are downtown. I mean, if you've been there, I'm sure, and you'll see that those are down low. The buildings are very close, and they really do get to the cutting edge of that. And again, it's something you need to look at, and so setbacks are important, and setbacks are important in working with the operators. Some operators will police them like you're on a regular basis for you. One of the things some people and other clients have said, you know what, we want to measure the ambient level right now. What's it before we put this box out there? Because these things are not out there alone. And again, what we as engineers can do are to measure those levels. We can't really determine whether impact it's going to have, and I'm sure that some people, it's a different impact on them. But I did cut your thunder out there, but these are fairly high power, these devices, at least the ones I'm seeing. Now, there are cities where they're using the lower power radios like you have here, but you can bet that there are going to be applications coming in at the same level. And unless you have a very unique situation here. Because by and large, the prevalent radios are typically 160-watt radios, and there's typically 2 radios involved. So just the power alone in raw wattage is fairly high.
Okay, I have another part of this question for you. So you touched on cumulative effects. Could you talk with us about cumulative effects of not like an antenna farm, but like an antenna farm? So if we've got a 300-foot separation requirement between, is it 300 feet is what we're proposing now, from one site to another, assuming we're going to have one service provider per location, and then we have another one operating at the same levels of power, assuming the same equipment, 300 feet away, do you think it'd be reasonable to include that in the analysis, even if it's projected? even if there's not another carrier there, to determine what that cumulative number would be?
Well, I can tell you at the 300-foot level distance, because you just hit me on the right day, because I was just cranking these things out, it's less than 1%. So if in an ideal world, where all you had to deal with were these cells, that's right. I think that, remember, it varies with the inverse square. So in most cases, if there isn't anything within 50 feet or so, it would be less than 5%, which would fall out of the FCC regulations on it. But realistically, I think you want to err on the side of checking all these things out. Remember, it's not just these things. You've got police radios around, you've got ham radio operators, you've got radio stations, and it all adds up. I think what you want to have a feeling is that you've done due diligence, or due diligence has been done. Unfortunately, most of the applications, for example, when you get to hotels, as an example, many of the hotels in cities have these antennas on. You've got multiple carriers. Sometimes there's a hotel across the street, so the geometry gets to be a little complex. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it. I'm just saying, when you look at this, I don't know how many of you have studied vector algebra, but basically what you have to do is to take the summation of all the possible locations there. So you really need a database. You need to have a database of where there are emitting devices, and you need to look at those. And some of them you can just throw out and say, hey, that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, and then lastly,
I'm actually going to, forgive me, I'm going to cut off the questions right now because I want to make sure that we've got time for as much public input as we can get.
I'll just ask.
And we'll come.
No problem.
The consultants are always here, don't worry about
Yeah,
that.
and we will, I am going to give us more time towards the end, but I want to make sure we get public comment in. So you can give me some cards. Thank you. All right, we've got a few cards here, so what I'm going to do is call a few names up and ask you to line up here at the podium. That way, when it's time for you to speak, you can step right up and we don't have to wait for people to come up. So first is Tiffany Johnson. After that is Christy Newhausen. And after that will be Courtney Morrow. So those are our first three. And we will give everyone 3 minutes to speak.
Tell me when.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I wasn't super prepared. I wasn't sure how this was all going to go, but I was just wondering for Katie, you reiterated several times that staff agrees with the distances for the ordinances that were in place. And I know that you received so many emails and that 100 feet was never even an option for anyone who lives in San Clemente. So I'm wondering who is staff and how did that number even get reached? I don't think that anyone here would be happy with 100 feet. As you know, the last city council meeting, there was not one person who stood up wanting cell towers within these close distances. It was also presented that firefighters here in California are exempt from any cell towers next to them now, and that they conducted their own studies. And they don't have any hidden agendas. They were very clear that there were effects there with firefighters, and that was only 3G technology. So I want you guys to think about that. Also, I saw that Mike Pettis has a patent in this industry, so I'm wondering if someone can be super unbiased if they are patenting products for this industry. These ordinances will not protect us, and we talked about the fiber optic cables, and I'm wondering why can't we go that route with all fiber optics instead of the RF exposure? The National Toxology Program is an interagency program run by the United States Department of Health and Human Services, and it conducted a 10-year, $30 million study, and this was in 2018, and it was on 2G and 3G technology, And it found clear evidence in male rats that they did indeed get cancer from RF exposure. So everything we heard today was no, 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 it's safe, it's good. But do your research. This is a government agency here in the United States that put a lot of time and money into it, and this was 2G and 3G. We also know that cell companies are uninsurable, and that's for a reason, because there's going to be lawsuits, things are going to happen, and they're too high risk. Encinitas is the closest to our city, and they've done a great job. I mean, they had so many people show up, and their ordinances make sense. They have to stay 500 feet from houses, daycares, and schools. And tonight it was proposed 500 feet from our schools, but not our homes. Why? Why aren't they the same? We spend more time in our homes than we do in our schools. So that would make sense, right? That we can come to a common ground. Also, if you start at 100 feet, there's always going to be exemptions. They're going to get closer and closer to our home. So why start at the baseline of only 100 feet? Let's start higher, and let's actually make it so that we feel safe in our homes, because that's your guys' job, is to make us feel safe. We've elected you to speak for us. There's not been one person who's ever come up and said, yay, we want these cell towers. Not one. So please listen. And also, they said that there has to be 1,000 feet away from any other cell towers that are already in place. So I really hope that you guys will consider our feelings and thoughts here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Christy Newhausen and Laura Fisher, if you could come up in the line. And I'll just mention, I appreciate your support of the speakers, but if there's applause, there's pause between the speakers, and that does slow down the time that people, reduce the amount of time that people have to speak. So please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. St. Clementi's draft ordinance of 100 feet from the closest home and 500 feet from a school is nowhere near what would be considered a safe distance for the sake of one's health and well-being. We are asking for a distance of at least 500 to 1,000 feet away from the nearest home and school. Similar to our neighboring beach cities ordinance in Encinitas, it was mentioned by staff that Encinitas' landscape was very different than St. Clementi's, therefore we couldn't compare their ordinance to our own. I disagree, not only because I have visited Encinitas many times, but Encinitas Chamber of Commerce website describes their city, which sounds almost identical to our own, as follows. Located along 6 miles of Pacific coastline in northern San Diego County, Encinitas has an approximate population of 60,000 and is characterized by coastal beaches, cliffs, flat-top coastal areas, steep mesa bluffs, and rolling hills. In regards to RF, if you look at the cell phone, for example, we are told in our cell phone handbook or in the settings of our phones to keep it at least an inch from our bodies at all times. According to the Environmental Health Trust, there have already been over 50 documented cases of breast cancer from women who keep their phone in their bra for a certain period of time, and cases of lowered sperm count in men who leave their phones in their front pockets. Now you take a cell tower that gives off RFs of up to 95 gigahertz. If we're talking about the 5G, triple of what we are currently receiving from the 4G, on a constant basis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then that can penetrate through the walls of our homes where we are supposed to feel safe. How is this okay? We just learned the sun hitting the ground is equal to about 100,000 microwatts, if I got that right. But however, we fail to mention the small cell does not get turned off at night like the sun. So it's a constantly going. There are literally hundreds of studies and reports which show evidence of the adverse health impacts of RF emissions and EMFs. We, the residents of St. Clemente, ask you to not make our beautiful small beach town another statistic. Also, in regard to the draft ordinance, we ask that you consider removing the exclusion on any public hearing when it comes to wireless permits through the Planning Commission and City Council. Why should those who reside in the city be forced to have our mouths closed when a cell phone company decides to place a health hazard small cell next to a home or school? Is that abiding by our First Amendment rights? Thank you.
Thank you. And Laura Fisher and Jeff Perkin, if you can line up. Laura, you're up.
Did you call Courtney Morrow before Laura?
I did, I'm sorry. Got the cards out of order, my fault.
All right. In general, I am quite disappointed with the draft ordinance as it currently stands. I can't tell you how much time I've spent away from my young kids. I have a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And I have been putting countless amount of time into studying different ordinances, looking at different research. The evidence is clear that there is serious health effects with putting these so close to homes. And I know that you guys cannot make a determination based on health effects, but I would like to just pose a couple questions. If this is so safe, why are so many cities facing the same resistance regarding the deployment of small wireless facilities? If this is so safe, why has the FCC completely removed local municipalities from using consideration of public health and safety in this zoning process? Because this is a zoning process. Let's bring it back to what this actually is. If this is so safe, why can't industry get third-party insurance? If this is so safe, why did the 2018 National Toxicology Program find clear evidence of brain cancer in rats as a result of exposure to RF? If this is so safe, would you put one outside your child's bedroom? This is very real for us, and it should be for you too. You live here. Some people aren't willing to take one for the team to have one this close to their home, and I think you need to listen to these people and be thoughtful in this process. Perhaps what I find to be the most alarming of our ordinance is just the complete exclusion of public appeal in this process. In addition to that, the time limits for filing appeal have been decreased. I've been looking at many ordinances. I've not found one that has 2 days. 2 days is very short. The only other one who has it is San Juan Capistrano, but guess who their city attorney is? It's also BB&K. So there's some consistency there, I suppose. The other issue that I've come across is when we are noticing on a decision, it doesn't include noticing for those who received initial notice. Just putting it on a website, we don't even know when these are coming through. We don't know, I mean, it's such a quick shot clock, only 300 feet, but this affects more. It's just not a resident-friendly process, and I think it's incumbent upon you guys who represent the residents here in San Clemente to make sure that we can put as many safeguards as possible into this process. Like I said, we understand you cannot use health and safety as a means to deny these. We get that. But there's other things that you guys can do, and we want you guys to explore those options. This shouldn't be so easy for industry. The FCC has already done that for them. They're going to continue to bully their way into every city possible, and I just hope that, we can do what we can to fight back. If you need examples of that, Encinitas is a great example. We even watched last week's Laguna Beach City Council, their council member, Eisman, is asking very pointed questions. We expect you to do the same. Lastly, I was told that a particular commissioner was going to recuse himself from this process. I'm not quite sure why they're here.
Okay, thank you. Laura Fisher? And Jim Nelson, if you could step up.
Hi, I have 4 pages of notes that I've taken my time to write on the ordinance with my comments. I hope each one of you on the Planning Commission reads them and responds to them and thinks about them. I really did appreciate the engineering talks. I understood them all. I have worked as an engineer for 20 years. I'm a biomedical engineer. I have a bachelor's and master's in that degree. And biomedical engineers are the engineers that bring technology and the human body together. For 20 years, I have worked, some products I've worked with have RF. The current one I work with has RF. I know a lot about this, I understand, and guess where AT&T wants to put the tower? 58 feet from my home and 30 feet from my property line, and I am pissed, okay? I understand the science, I've understood it from day one. Now, first of all, the FCC guideline is lacking, okay? All of the engineers here tonight talked about the guideline in terms of power and heating. That is one side of it. The second side of it is biologic effects. There was no speaker tonight on those. Of course, heating is an effect. There are other effects that have to be acknowledged. All of this time, I have kept quiet on those effects because what I'm trying to do is stop the cell tower from going outside my daughter's window in a house I've lived in for 15 years. The major issues I have with this ordinance are, first of all, the authority. Only 2 non-elected city employees, the city planner and the community development director, hold all power in the decision-making process for small cells. There are no public hearings. The public appeal process appeals to the same individuals that made the decision which is under appeal. All exceptions to the ordinance are only considered by the same two city employees. The second largest issue I have is the issue on exceptions. The ordinance requires substantial evidence. The expectation of what is required or guidance as to what would constitute substantial evidence needs to be provided. One of our speakers called for a third-party expert. This is what is needed to decide on these questions like what's viable, what's technically feasible, are there aesthetic equivalents or superior alternatives. We cannot trust the cell companies to give us that information. There's gonna say there's no other viable options, and that's what they've done so far in our city. Please think about this. San Clemente elected officials need to take a stand.
Thank you. Jeff Perkin, you're up, and Bill Krettinger is next in line. Thank you. Please.
Okay, so obviously you could see that this is a pretty serious issue to us, as well as to communities locally, around the country, and around the world. It's tough because if you guys haven't researched this on your own and looked at what other cities are doing, I don't know how much we're going to be able to convince you or educate you if you haven't looked at everything that we've sent you. At this point, we could keep saying the same studies over and over again. We could keep issuing our concerns, but it's kind of disappointing at this point. We're just hoping that you guys will take an interest like all these other people are. And I think this meeting tonight has been somewhat enlightening with the engineers that were asked to present their side. Just a couple of things. One of, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he said that the rules are quote, industry friendly. And obviously they extremely are. He also said, quote, I'm not a doctor. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of doctors speaking out about this around the world right now. The World Health Organization in 2011 said that, or categorized wireless radiation as a possible human carcinogen. And also cumulative effect. Quote, these things are not out there alone, is what he said. And we have to take into consideration that in our homes, we have more and more devices linked together communicating. We have routers, we have computers, cell phones, iPads, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's all up to each individual to decide how many devices they have. But and then, I mean, businesses are going to be putting their own emitting devices. I believe there's something called the OTARD rule where houses can be approached by the wireless industry to put towers on their home if they want to, and that'll affect their neighbors. It's just, we live in a soup of this radiation already. If you buy like a EMF RF device and measure it, even in this building, she has one tonight, we're all in a soup as we speak. We all don't feel very good to be here. It's not like a fun environment to be in. And we don't want to live with this 24/7 in our homes. So, thank you.
Thank you. Bill Krottinger?
I think it's Jim Nelson, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, I flipped my card too soon. Yes, Jim Nelson.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
And Gail Trask is next in line.
Thank you, Commission, for having this tonight and spending the time on this very important, topic. I think, as you can tell, a lot of people are very passionate about this. It is a very big impact on the people that are extremely close to these proposed towers, which I happen to be one of them on the Veracruz site. Couple things I wanted to talk about is on the ordinance, we have this 300-foot notification. They have to send out a notification if you're within 300 foot of this tower, which it makes no sense to me if they do that. There's obviously going to be an impact on those people that are within 300 feet of the tower. But then they have this ordinance that it can be 100 foot from a residential lot line, which that distance needs to be further. And I think there was two distances that Katie had pulled up, one at 100 feet and one at 1,000 feet. I don't think we have to look at the extremes. I think we have to look at the 300-foot lot line or the 500-foot lot line. Obviously, the schools have a 500-foot lot line ordinance, and there's a reason for that. It's because of the extended exposure. And as people talked about tonight, you have that extended exposure if you have kids in the home for even a longer period of time. So I think that's a very crucial point, is let's not look at extremes. Katie, I could be wrong, but I think you did pull up 100 feet and then 1,000 feet right after that. There's got to be a happy median there where we feel a little bit safer between those two extremes. The other thing that I wanted to address here was who are these for? Who is this? What does this need? We're talking about cell towers that have to be within 1,000 feet apart to connect to each other, which tells me that there's a 500-foot radius around these towers. If you put these on our street that cuts through our community, that has homes that are, next to this main artery, Veracruz, is it for the people driving through on Veracruz? Because it's not for the people who live there. So there hasn't been a need shown to the residents that this is going to impact. I don't know if we're putting these in so people can stream Netflix on their phone when they're driving through the community. It makes no sense to me. So we need to look at that closer, because the radius that we've seen that AT&T's provided, it only covered the first street of residences. It doesn't cover our community, which they're saying that that's why they're putting these in. So that's a major question that needs to be addressed. There's 3 other sites that have been approved with close proximity to our community. What does it look like when those are powered up? Those have already been approved. Why are we peppering our community when we don't even know what coverage those are going to provide? So all these questions are just out there in the ether. No one's addressing them. No one's giving us specifics. And all we look at is something that's proposed within 58 feet of my neighbor's home and 80 feet within 10 other homes that are at the same level. One of the engineers talked about the height of the pole and how important it is. Our topography, it goes directly in the residences because we're on a slope. So that's another thing we need to look at. We're not flat with these towers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Bill Carpenter.
Hi, thank you. And I actually had that was a very good segue to my first question. Now, the calculations for the power density, those were presented earlier today. Those numbers are at the highest power density, right? Like same elevation as the antenna? Okay, so that's good to know. Now, I am, full disclosure, I'm a member of the radio club. I played with walkie-talkies when I was a kid. I'm sure most of us have. And they're a lot of fun. But many of you probably know that radio waves move at the speed of light, 300 million meters per second. The only thing faster than that is fear, unfortunately. But, an ordinance is needed, definitely. And you guys have a good start. Now, does the Planning Commission devise the ordinance, or is that City Council?
Well, I'll look to address that questions after you guys speak.
Because I just want to make sure we're talking to the right folks. Now, 1,000-foot space, especially at some higher frequencies, like your cell phone's its receiver is sensitive to about negative 115 decibels. At 1,000 feet, it might not work from some of these things, right? And there are people in the community that can help. We can do projections, we can model things. We even have equipment that can measure what it is in certain places at certain times. So, I want to encourage members of the community to, reach out to people. we're happy to help. Oh, another neat, yeah. Oh, there's so much here with the science. And I guess you can read a lot and come away with information that's kind of dubious, right? And there's been a lot of really, really good science done on rats. And one of the reasons medical technology isn't further along is because people are very different from rats. I'm pretty sure we've cured cancer in rats. Haven't done it in people yet, right? Science has found a lot of ways to do really wonderful and really terrible things to rats. And it's just not always applicable to people. But yeah, so I just want you guys to be mindful of how the technology works. Range is inversely proportionate to frequency. So as we look at higher frequencies, they're going to need to be closer together. It's just the science. But these radios especially, and the 160 watt for small cell seems like an awful lot. So it was interesting to hear that. I know the radios here are a great deal smaller. And I mean, I ran the projections and it all looks pretty good. I definitely, for people who don't want it right outside their house, I understand that. And if anybody needs to volunteer, I'm on the north side of town. And my AT&T signal at home is terrible. So, thank you.
Thank you. Gail Trask, and I'll ask Michael Farrimer and Anne Marie Hines to line up, please. Please.
Hi. So I live in the Reserve South, so 3 streets down where the proposed tower would be going. I am also an AT&T wireless customer. I get plenty of service driving down Vista Hermosa and Camino Veracruz. I'm not really sure what the problem is. I'm able to talk to my mom when I exit the freeway, drive up Vista Hermosa, turn left on Veracruz, pick up my son at Truman Benedict, and drive home. My call, maybe I missed like a syllable of one of her words. I'm not a fan of these cell towers. I'm also a nurse, so I've cared for many cancer patients, and I know there are studies out there showing that there are adverse effects, and cancer is one of the risks. Metabolic disorders are another risk. Hold on, I have a list here. And neurological disorders and reproductive harm. There's also been studies showing, I think the military did some studies on radio frequency waves, I'm probably not using the right terminology, that there's effects down to the insect and plant level. I also know that there was a cancer cluster in Ripon, California. I know they cannot rule out the Sprint towers as a cause for that, but they're looking into other reasons. But like, I think 4 or 5 kids and 2 teachers developed cancer. And it took them 2 years to get those towers removed, because they're worried about that. I also spoke with someone at the Capital Unified School District, and she said she was not happy to hear that the cell tower was going to be less than a mile from Truman Benedict. And I know there's other ones that are like right next to Marblehead. We live right in between those 2 elementary schools. She said they are trying to remove cell towers from school property. She's not able to help us because it's not on school property. So she is trying to actually remove towers from those properties. So I'm not sure why we're trying to put some in above our children's heads. I have two young sons. So, and low sperm count is actually one of the health effects that has been shown in some of these studies, and I want to make sure I have grandchildren. I don't want them to have that issue. Anyway, another thing I wanted to say is that I also read that 4G can travel dozens of miles. I don't know if anyone can address that. And then there's also the concern for the simultaneous exposures to multiple types of RFR, so that we have the 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G over our heads. There's also a mental health impact of all this technology that everyone's so excited about. A screen addiction, or an addiction expert in his book wrote that brain imaging studies have shown that excessive screen exposure can cause neurological damage in a young person's developing brain in the same way cocaine can. And in a time when we have mental health issues all over the country and in this world, I don't see why we need to have faster service or service driving down the street. Kids and adults have their faces glued to their screens enough as it is. We live in a beautiful beach town. They should be out connecting with each other and appreciating our beaches. I just hope that you can protect our community because we elected you, and please keep us safe. Okay. My kids, thanks.
Thank you. Michael Farrimer. And before you start, Michael, the last card I have is for Christina Critch, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, so that would be the last person in line. If anybody else would like to speak to this issue, please fill out a card and hand it in to our secretary.
Just for your record, Mike Farraher, I work for Verizon Wireless. But first and foremost, thank you for this opportunity to participate in this public forum. I would like to first and foremost recognize staff's efforts. I believe the panel of speakers here were offered some tremendous information and insight as to the operations of wireless in general. Very well thought out, well planned out. One of the issues that I hear repeatedly, and I can certainly speak to on behalf of the carriers, one of the things to stop the deployment of small cells or any additional cell phone facilities is to stop using wireless. The simple fact is that we are deploying these facilities where they are needed. And while I often hear the refrain that, well, my service is fine. Well, it may be fine right now, but I can tell you for sure, based upon the level of demand that is consistently put upon our network, we have sectors dying, we have sectors failing, and we may have been able to cobble together a signal for that user in that one particular site right now, but without small cells, the level of service that you currently enjoy will stop. It will diminish and it will continue to degrade. It's very simple physics. Without the buttressing of these smaller cells to offload some of the data demands that we currently are experiencing on our network, your cell phones will continue to degrade. The service will continue to degrade. We have 5 lanes on the highway. You have 5 bars. But if the highway is full of cars, you're not getting any signal. You're not making that connection. It's not going to work. So these facilities are not inexpensive. We put them where they are absolutely vital and where they're absolutely needed. With all due respect and regarding the proposed ordinance, there are certainly some sticking points, and I hope to continue to work with staff on. That notwithstanding, I will make this commitment that Verizon in particular is committed to citing and working on citing issues as it relates to your residents. It is important to us to be a good neighbor, a good resident, and on behalf of the exponentially larger number of folks that daily demand, that rely upon our network's demand to provide them service for work, for social engagements, et cetera, for emergency services, response times, et cetera. We would simply we insist that, or excuse me, we remain committed to working with your citizens to work with siting issues, but it's vitally important for us to be able to deploy these small cells. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let's see, Anne Marie Hines.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Thank you so much for letting us speak tonight. And Katie, thank you for all your work as well. I am a pre-med UCLA graduate and a lifelong educator. My husband took an early retirement 2.5 years ago from public education because his school was an IPAD distinguished school, and he was not comfortable radiating his 3rd grade students with IPAD radiation throughout most of the day, which is known to cause brain damage and reproductive harm to these young little bodies. Even before 5G was proposed, dozens of petitions and appeals by international scientists, including the Freiburger Appeal, signed by over 3,000 physicians, called for a halt to the expansion of wireless technology and a moratorium on new base stations. This comes from global research. One of my son's friends in my neighborhood was diagnosed at 12 with lymphoma last year. A dad of one of my students had part of his face removed exactly where he holds his phone on his head. And one of my lifelong friends last week just told me that she is losing her memory. DNA damage is caused by wireless radiation. On 7/17/2019, last summer, you guys approved 5 5G towers. There's only one site, the 901 Avenida Hermosa Site 5, that is not near a residential area. The goal of the telecommunications industry is to install 800,000 small cell towers across America by 2026. This will require every carrier to install base stations every 100 meters.
Let's learn from history. Radium was discovered by the Curies in 1898 and began being manufactured synthetically in the United States in 1910. Before the dangers of this product were understood, it was marketed to the public as a wonder drug and a glow-in-the-dark novelty. They put radium in chocolate, water, toys, medical products, cosmetics, health clubs, and watches. Until the casualties began to appear, the radium girls who painted the watches started losing their teeth, had bone fractures. They got anemia, and they even died. Okay? Now today, radium has been pulled from the market, but there's a Superfund site. There is an alternative to 5G. Fiber optics are much safer and faster than Wi-Fi. So what is the rush? On February 6, 2019, at a Senate Commerce hearing, a FCC representative concluded that no 5G safety studies had been conducted. The science is not proven yet, and now we're all part of an experiment. I want equal justice. Since 2004, the International Association of Firefighters have officially opposed cell towers on fire stations, as research showed firefighters suffered neurological damage from them, including memory problems, confusion, and feelings of weakness. So why do employees working near these buildings and cell towers have to be radiated without their consent? Anyway, I know I'm out of time, but also in England, in a community called Gatesheads, residents with a new 5G tower have chronic nosebleeds, they're giving stillbirth, and have insomnia.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, thank you so much.
And the last card I have is Christina Pritch. Did I get that name right? Thank you.
Hi. I was just wondering why, since the master plan hasn't been updated since 2008, we shouldn't be updating that before approving applications, just for all the duplication, and, you know, if Sprint comes in, Verizon comes in, T-Mobile comes in, I mean, it's just a lot. So if you look at it on a map and we were to map out all of the sites, I think that'd be helpful for people kind of understanding, you know, what we're looking at here. I think it's more than people realize. I think we should always look to the precautionary principle. There's no studies on 5G being safe. I mean, there's talk from the industry. They were going to do a $25 million study. Where is that? You know, they have not been able to prove it's safe. So, you know, to put our kids at risk, and then we decide, oh, this is like, you know, lots of other things that were deemed safe and are not now, asbestos, smoking, all the things that we know now aren't safe. And our children have to be sitting there as guinea pigs. And he just lost one of his teammates, an 8-year-old boy, to leukemia. He went in last month, went in for treatment. He lived by 3 major cell towers, Dana Hills High School, less than a quarter of a mile away. And he's gone. I mean, this is why we're here. We're parents. We don't want to take this chance for money and to lose our children. He was here. And he's gone now. You know, he lived by 3 cell towers. You cannot say that this is safe without studies. I'm so angry at industry for coming in like this without not being able to prove this to us. Why would we come here? We have nothing to gain. You know, prove it's safe, go to the precautionary principle, look to other cities that are standing up and saying, hold up, we got Encinitas, now Laguna Beach is on. You had 90 cities suing the city of the League of Cities. I mean, people are standing up, there's more litigation, and I think that being conservative in this case is in everyone's best interest, especially our children. And regarding 4G, 5G, I mean, I think there's confusion on that too by a lot of people. I've heard so many different things, I'm not even clear about what we're doing here. They say it's not 5G. According to what I've learned, the new antennas will be mostly 4G and part of a process called antenna densification. It's going to be all over the place. They're going to need them every, I guess, 3 to 10 houses, I've heard. We just need to consider the density of them and the proximity to the houses. So the greater the setback, whatever you guys can do to try and protect our children so that you don't have to hear about another child with leukemia. And no, it was your decision because we had to put it 100 feet away, 50 feet away. And yeah, 500 feet from the school is great. Let's do that or more for residences, and let this be proven that it's safe before rolling it out on our kids. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So last call for this evening. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to this issue? Okay, not seeing one. There's other opportunities. We'll be having future hearings as well. Before we start into planning commission discussion, there's a couple of questions that came up from people who spoke. I'm going to see if we can address it. One question was, Katie, how was the 100-foot distance mark reached in the proposed ordinance?
It does go back to the maps, and one gentleman mentioned, obviously, there's some middle ground there, and we do have some interactive maps we can go through and take a look at that. But the 100-foot distance was measured, well, first let me take a step back. All of the distances we choose need to be tied to aesthetics. So I hear the residents on some of these other issues that needs to be tied to aesthetics. The reason we did go ahead and put the 500 feet in for schools is because we felt that didn't impact the available areas for small cells as much as that would if you applied it to residential properties, simply because the land area that is schools is much less in our city than the land area that is residential properties. That's really the reason that we did that. When you do go up to 500 feet, the areas that are available that are white on those maps shrink significantly. If there's interest, we can go kind of look at that. I didn't know how much we wanted to delve into it at this meeting, just because we had a lot of ground to cover, but we can do that.
Okay, you might want to, maybe just so people can see now that we've had some conversation, you want to flip up that map you had of showing where what it looks like when there's a 100-foot distance. So, and while she's doing that, there was another question on who passes the ordinance. Ordinances need to first come through the Planning Commission. That's us, and that's one of the reasons we're having this workshop. We are scheduled to take a look and vote on the ordinance on December, is it the 18th, Katie?
Yes.
December 18th. And then that we provide our recommendation, and then it goes to City Council after that, and at one of their meetings after that. So.
Let me make sure. Here we go.
Planning Commission meetings, usually 2 a month, every other week, so. And you can see all of the meeting schedules, both for the Planning Commission and the City Council, up on the city website.
So this is 500 feet from residential and schools.
This is 500.
Correct.
Okay.
And I know a lot of times so you can kind of see generally the white areas. A lot of these are open space areas, which, as I've previously mentioned, those really don't work in terms of the design of small cells because they by design have to be somewhat close to residents. So it does help sometimes to zoom in on certain areas so we can kind of see what we're working with. So I'm picking random places, but so here we can just kind of scroll around and look a little closer at what these white areas are. Again, this is 500 feet from residential.
And can you show us 100 feet? Because that's what's proposed at the moment in the ordinance, right?
Yes.
Draft ordinance.
Sure thing. So let's go down then to 300, because I heard for that as well. Parks, let's take that one off for now. There we go. So this would be 300. Let's make sure it's refreshed. So I don't know if there's particular.
Make it bigger so we can see the whole city.
Overall.
Bigger.
Katie, are you saying that they cannot go in those gray areas?
They cannot go in those gray areas without requesting an exception.
But they are, based on the current ones that have been applied?
Well, they would have to for those particular, the two that are on appeal, you mean? Yeah.
We're not in public discussion here. Okay, that's 300 feet, Katie?
Yes.
That's 300, right?
300.
So white area is 300. We're going towards 100, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so now if we're ready to flip to 100, and I'll just do 100 from schools as well, just to keep it a little bit simpler then. So this would be 100. And again, I highlighted, I think the key is that this captured some of our arterials. Still doesn't capture most of Veracruz, to community members' point. But there are some arterial areas where you would be able to cite these without an exception.
So, real quick, just the two appeals that have been referenced in our communication that we've received and I think were mentioned tonight, assuming that, let's just say that we adopted this ordinance, right? Those sites that were picked there would still need to go through the exception process, because I don't see on Veracruz there that area is in white.
It's not.
Okay, so those would still be exceptions that would be subject to public, I mean, it'd come before.
So it's still to be determined. So those applications are still pending. And so if the entirety of all of the standards were made retroactive, and like I mentioned, we're still working on that with the city attorney because we have to work through that, they would have to apply then for an exception.
But the exception process, walk me through the exception process, what that looks like real quick.
It's additional things that the carrier has to prove. So they have to prove that they need the exception. They cannot do it somewhere where they don't need the exception to meet whatever goal they're trying to meet in their service provision. And then they need to additionally provide proof that they've taken the least amount of exception possible, right? So if they're saying we need 80 feet from a residence instead of 100, say that's what got adopted, they would have to prove that they couldn't do 90 feet or 91 feet or 99 feet.
Is it still ministerial?
It is, as drafted.
Okay, so it would be approved by city staff.
That's correct.
And the law requires that.
The law does not require that. The FCC does not require any particular process. They require that our fees be very low and our turnaround times be very fast, the shot clocks.
So I just want to clarify something here with the exception process. So just as to kind of go through a narrative, if a carrier comes in and they look at this map and says, it's 100, say we do 100 feet and this is what the map looks like, and they say, no, we need something on the middle of Veracruz or something that's currently a gray area, they have to show something like, what? We're allowed to be able to have some kind of connection between our towers or something like that. Mm-hmm. We don't have that unless we go into this spot on Veracruz. That's the sort of thing that they have to describe?
Correct. And you can accomplish that through a variety of means. We're looking at which ones will be most effective. The Encinitas ordinance has been very helpful with that. They have specific provisions for, providing alternative sites analysis. You have to provide at least this number of, alternative sites within 500 feet and prove that none of those meet that need adequately.
Okay. All right, thanks. I'm sorry, Don, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple comments as we discussed. I think the appeals process needs to, it's 2 days and then there was all ministerial. I think we ought to have an appeals process that goes to some public body that's appointed or elected. For my own input, I don't know if we're in discussion here, but.
Are you referring to the exception process?
No, it's just
appeals.
I'm talking about the appeals process.
Appeals, okay.
It's 2 days, and then it goes from the planner to the community development director, and you're done. It's all ministerial. I think we ought to rethink that. I thank the engineers tonight for your calculations and all that. The biggest concern I have is topography. We know that the most energy comes horizontally from the antenna itself that's supposed to be 50 feet in the air, but some of the sites proposed 80 feet away, it's right next to a house, because of topography. The antenna's in a bowl. And we should probably have some consideration of geography so that we don't, put an antenna, the horizontal, most power outage, blasting right at some house, whatever. So some sort of crafting of wording on antenna placement. The distances are insightful because we ran into the same thing with SB2. As we started expanding, you get beyond to 300 feet or 500 feet in the city, everything implodes on you due to terrain. It's just a global comment. And the other thing I've always used on cell phone approvals before has been those coverage plots. And the coverage plots always showed a need, as Verizon came and whatever else, particularly on a macro tower, the before and after impact of Verizon macro site, which by the way is in the middle of Vista Hermosa Park, and most of them are on our park, Gran Gorgonio, filled in the gaps. And when I looked at the plots that AT&T provided to these mini sites, they weren't an apples to apples correlation at all. And when you looked at their plots, you'd have to question why they were putting the antenna where they were putting it, because they were putting it in a bowl, which is going to blast into the side of a mountainside. And so why would they put it there? Where was their public benefit for themselves? Their own data didn't show any benefit for them to expend that, particularly the one on Veracruz near the school.
Think vertically.
And so, there's a verticality to this, and there's a terrain issue to this that I think we need to consider, because we're not quite the terrain of Encinitas. I've read their ordinance, it's very good. I think it's a good blueprint to start with. Anyway, those are my comments, because I know we're running out of time.
Okay, thank you, Don. Zen, did you?
Yeah, Katie, a few comments. First on appeal process. I'm a little concerned about the due process, about a 2-day appeal period. Did you talk to the attorney about that? Is 2 days reasonable enough to give people the right?
Well, I don't know that the attorney would comment on how reasonable something is, but the attorney gave us the option. I mean, the city, the decision makers have the option of allowing a 10-day appeal period to the city council, all the way down to not allowing an appeal at all. What is reasonable is a policy decision.
So the decision will be made by the city planner first, then it can be appealed to a director.
Correct.
Where's the zoning administrator here?
If it went to the zoning if we do allow an appeal to an elected body, it would have to go directly to the city council. There's really not a great other option that I'm aware of. And you'll notice Encinitas, I believe, goes directly to the city council.
So the director's decision is a final one?
What's that?
The director's decision, that's a final decision?
How it's drafted, yes.
Okay. So if any residents are not happy about, do they have any recourse beyond that?
In the courts, yes.
Not to the city council?
No.
Okay. Another question is, the spacing between the small cell is 300 feet as proposed. Are we allowing co-located?
Theoretically, yes. From a practical standpoint, I don't see that happening, at least not in the near future, but it's possible.
Okay. Well, I hear from one of the industry speakers saying about 10 to 20 feet would be considered safe. But in case multiple carriers decide to co-locate them, then the exposure would increase. So 10 to 15 feet becomes maybe 20 to 40 feet. So within that zone, the safety becomes a little questionable. Who is responsible for the tree maintenance?
Who's responsible for the what? Can you repeat it?
Say, if the antenna is close to a tree, and someone trimmed that tree, would it be within that zone, which is considered maybe not safe enough?
Sorry, I'm struggling to understand the correlation between the tree and the safety.
Well, if the antenna is located nearby a tree,
yes,
and one day the tree needs to be trimmed or trained.
I see.
And that people, whether it's a landscape worker or city maintenance worker, will be within that zone.
Yes.
That's possibly too close to it. So.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I understand now. So with these facilities, there are warning signs that have to be posted depending on what the RF study shows. They're posted at various locations. In this case, they would be up pretty high up on the pole. We do have a provision in there that you'll find in the standard conditions that requires these carriers maintain contact information with us. And so if it were, if it were a concern, that landscape company or the city would be able to contact them and ask them to potentially power it down for that day so that that maintenance could be achieved.
Now, if an antenna is installed on a rooftop, and the neighboring structure is very close to it, within that 10 to 20 or 10 to 20 feet. And then the antenna would prevent the rooftop of the other building, of the neighboring structure to be used safely.
We would be able to take a closer look at it, because in that case, you would need an exception, because we do require 300 feet separation. But always,
200 feet separation?
300 feet.
From what?
From cell site to cell site.
No. Let's say we have two buildings abutting each other. And the carrier wants to install a rooftop antenna on one building. And the neighboring structure would be within that zone, possibly.
So, yeah, and that would be permitted in commercial and industrial areas. And we always, every application requires an RF study. Some of them, especially macro sites, would require that beforehand. And the reports are typically pretty thick, and they measure all of those things, and they measure both occupational and non-occupational, as well as the individual outputs, as well as cumulative. I know that it got brought up several times tonight. So those studies would be required then at installation for small cells. You'll find that in the standard conditions as well. And our standard condition reads that the city chooses who that professional is, who does those readings, to ensure that both that site's output for everyone, for whatever the circumstances are in the field, whether there's a building 20 feet away from it or not, those reports would cover all of that.
Okay. And also, can you request information about the energy distribution?
Can I?
Typically, much like a lighting photometric diagram, it's the vertical distribution of energy. I hear it's much higher horizontally and lower vertically. But a diagram is the best thing to look at it.
So just quick clarification, you would want that with the applications then, like with the RF study?
Just if we have another workshop like that, or next time when it's in front of a planning commission, can you have someone to supply us a typical distribution curve around the antenna?
One of the speakers did speak to that with using the higher power radios than we're seeing, but that he is seeing typically. Believe he said about 25 feet. Welcome to be corrected by that, but there's a recording, so you can go back and look. He said at the horizontal, about 25 feet for the higher power antennas.
Right.
Or radios.
Right.
I'm going to, we are about out of time. We have our regular meeting that we need to get started on. I think it's pretty clear that the Planning Commission would be more comfortable with a little bit more time and discussion on this. So let me take it as a to-do item to work with staff to see if we can't perhaps have a little more discussion on the Planning Commission before the December 18th meeting. I think discussion is important. We also have some outside constraints where we don't want to affect the calendar for how this is going to move through. So we have to kind of deal with both of those. But I will work on that. And last comment here?
Yeah, I have just a question about the Encinitas ordinance and how that dovetails in, because that's been mentioned tonight quite a bit. And something that I didn't fully appreciate came out tonight, which is the Encinitas ordinance sets a buffer of 300 feet from residences, correct?
It's 500.
Okay, 500. Okay, so it sets a number, but then the applicant is allowed to come in and justify why they need to have that at a lower level. In instance, the AT&T towers that are on appeal right now. In that case, if that were after our ordinance, AT&T could come in and they would justify rationale for why they needed to place it 48 feet from. Is that right? Am I understanding that?
That's correct.
And that is still a ministerial act that's done by staff at the counter, correct?
It's administrative.
Okay, administrative.
Yeah.
But it's done without notice to the residents. It's done without a public process like what we had to go through with 18.
Are you still referring to Encinitas?
Yes.
They do require notice even for their administrative actions, as will we.
Okay, we will for the administrative actions require notice. Okay, that was the one part that I missed, was that there will be notice that's provided. Okay.
So, very quick.
Maybe. Yes, thank you. So I would like to make a comment, and that is it Courtney? Wanted to speak to Courtney's comment about a recusal. So just so folks know that I've got a couple decades of experience representing the wireless industry, among other industries. I work in land use, entitlement, and development. My knowledge is acute on the topic, and I mean, it's been deep from the land use legal perspective as well as the health and safety component of it, which unfortunately our hands are tied at this time. So we're up here making land use determinations for which I, among the other gentlemen up here on the dais, have made a sworn oath and a promise to our community to make fair, reasonable decisions based on land use. And so I'm up here in my 5th year, doing it without fail. It's my community, I care about it, and everything I do up here is for the community. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay, so I just wanted to remind everyone in the public who's here, there are a few tables out on the side here with some of the mobile carriers and some of the people who've spoken tonight and staff. So if you have more questions or want to provide more input, please feel free. Thank you very much for being here. We've read all of the letters you sent us. We're very interested in the comments that you've made to us, and we really appreciate it. So thank you. And we'll take we'll break until 1:15. I will call to order the meeting of the, regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, November 20th, 2019. Michael, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Gabriel, can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Brown? Here. Commissioner Kaczynski? Absent. Commissioner Talley? Here. Commissioner Wu? Here. Chair Pro Tem Crandall? Absent. Vice Chair Blackwell?
Here.
And Chair Rowland?
Here. Item 4, special orders of business, we have none. Item 5, we have 2 sets of minutes. Are there any changes or a motion for the minutes of the regular study session of November 6th?
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the regular study session of November the 6th.
Second.
Motion by Talley, second by Brown. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unanimously, 5-0. Minutes from the regular Planning Commission meeting of November 6, 2019.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of corrections.
Okay.
The first item of correction that I have is on page 8, approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sentences down. It begins with right-of-way semicolon, which is something that we don't use often enough. I'm proud of you to use that. Nice job. Stated that the city currently holds title to the property in feet. That should actually be in fee. My other comment was that under the comments and suggestions, I did not see reference to the comment by the city attorney that you could not place gated access to public streets.
Do you have some proposed text you'd like to?
I think it would just be comment made by legal counsel that you cannot place gated access on public streets.
Gated access on public streets.
That was in reference to the discussion about the city's holding the title to the property in fee and that it was restricted by use of a private gate.
Okay.
Those are all the changes.
Don, did you have a change?
No.
Oh, yeah, John. Okay. Then is there a motion?
I'll make a motion with those corrections.
I'll second it.
Motion by Brown, second by Talley. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. I lost my agenda. Item 6, oral and written communications. Members of the public may address the commission on matters of public interest which pertain to the city and are not otherwise on the agenda. If you wish to speak, step forward. Please step forward to the microphone, and if you desire, state your name and/or city of residence for the record and make your presentations. Please limit your presentations to 3 minutes. I do have one card for the oral communication. Jill Amarato.
Yes. Hi. Good evening. I'm here on behalf of myself and several residents in and around my neighborhood. I'd first like to say that I know the protocol of getting project approvals, and I'm aware that this Planning Commission is one of the final steps in the process. I've been through this. That being said, I'm here because the potential buyer of a historic property, the Cliff House, just above the Beachcomber Bungalows, approached me with his plan. He told me he had addressed this commission last month, and he was given the strong impression that his project would be exempt from many of the historical guidelines that I was bound by with my historic house, the Gloria Swanson House, and the other houses in the neighborhood. He said mine was high-density residential, and his was a commercial, so he was exempt from many of the guidelines. He indicated he was adding several additional bungalows next to the current Cliff House residence, 5 to 8 bungalows, tiered down, starting from the top down to the lower area. He said he was going to alter the fountain and gardens to make room for those bungalows. Historic gardens are viewed daily from above by the community. His plan is to block the public view from the gardens and are not viewable from below, and they are not viewable from below. The proposed structures will impact the ambiance of the neighborhood and the view of the historic property and the grounds, as well as the big hotel he wants to, not the big hotel, but small hotel. In addition to his plan, he wants to dredge into the hillside below the house, his house, or that house, he's in escrow right now, to add a $20 million state-of-the-art parking structure affecting the historical walls and structures on the property. The whole charm and ambiance of the neighborhood would be lost. He plans on a breakfast, lunch, and dinner structure, violating the original structure and intent of the lower patio area of the property. He also plans on making this a wedding venue with weekend weddings, which again will impact the ambiance of this neighborhood because it's small and tight. So he wants a hotel, a wedding venue, a yoga venue, and who knows what else he'll add at the end of the day. So my question tonight is if you can answer this, because he said he was here and he got the impression that he could do this. Have the rules been relaxed this much in 5 years? And are they relaxed only because it's a commercial and not residential? And so historic is different for commercial. Can you guys answer that, or?
Yeah, let me respond to that. The Planning Commission only will render a decision based on an application that's in front of us, and it
Right.
sounds like the gentleman you were speaking to doesn't yet own the property. He's still in
Right.
escrow. So I assume there's no application that's been submitted
Right,
or anything.
and that's
we
why I
haven't
said
seen
it,
anything.
yeah, that's why I said at the beginning that I know there's a protocol, but I went through the same thing. And I got, I did some due diligence, and I got all the way to the commission and almost lost just getting a little, windows in my house, which is across the street. And I couldn't add a little 4-foot staircase to go downstairs because it was visible from the public. So my family has to go outside to go to bedrooms. So if this guy gets this, and I couldn't get my little stair to go downstairs to sleep, and we have to go outside to go down there, it's not. And then plus, I have to look at this, all this new structure, and that's supposed to be, historic.
I understand. The only assurance that I can give you is I can't speak to why the gentleman had the impression that he had, but we aren't
So he
going
didn't
to
come
render
here.
a decision
Okay,
unless
so-
we have an application in front of us.
Absolutely.
And
I
and we
understand
would only
that.
do that at that time. We're not going to talk
Yeah.
about a potential application or an
So
upcoming
I
application.
may be back here, right?
That's fine. Thank you.
At the end of the day. So the groundswell in the neighborhood is right now, so I just
I'd
wanted
like
to
to
speak
add-
for them. Pardon me?
I'd like to add that the city is in the process of doing a specific plan amendment, and it hasn't been approved by the city council, right?
Not yet. It's scheduled to go December 17th.
Okay, so some zoning standards in specific plan area are relaxed, so I encourage you to take a look at that, and you have a chance to go to city council. to
On December
express-
7th?
17th.
Oh, 17th?
Yes.
Oh, I read about you last night. It's going to meet you.
That is the comments that he's referring to.
I don't want to speculate on what he might have been referring to, so, but, okay, thank you.
Chairman, I was going to suggest if there are questions, and staff could probably assist her with some of the questions on the specific plan and that property and what they can and cannot do, we could be of assistance.
Great, thank you. So, yeah, so please contact Gabriel on
Oh,
staff.
okay.
He'd be happy
Okay.
to
All right, thank you.
work with you on it. Thank you, Gabriel. Item 7, consent calendar. We have nothing on our consent calendar. Item 8, public hearings. 8A, 610-628, Camino de los Mares discretionary sign permit, Plaza by the Sea master sign program. And Jonathan, you're going to be giving us our staff report today, right?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners, Chair Rulin. The application before us this evening is for a master sign program for discretionary sign permit that covers both the master sign program as well as a monument sign that is above 6 feet in height that's a part of that master sign program. The location is right off the Camino de los Mares off-ramp. This center was constructed in the early 1970s and has never had a master sign program. Our code does require that once you touch, modify, add 4 or more signs, then a master sign program is required. So this is just catching up to that code requirement that we have. It is adjacent to Ocean View Plaza, and it is within our Camino de los Mares focus area. It's considered a gateway location. It's within the Community Commercial 4 zoning district. It is a 4.4 acre area. The proposed project, again, is to establish that master sign program. I did provide some additional background here on this slide, that it is nearly identical to a proposed amendment to Ocean View's master sign program, and Brixmor is the property owner and has been at Ocean View. They acquired this property at Plaza by the Sea in December of 2017. So the 2 master sign programs will be very reflective of one another. I did reference as well that this is separate from this application, but currently Brixmor is also working through the application process for a site plan review that includes the removal of the wall that currently separates those 2 plazas, as well as the demo and reconstruction of a new building. So that is not a part of this application this evening, but just some background on some additional work that is in process by that applicant. So required entitlements would be just one in this case. We're looking at a discretionary sign permit that covers 2 things: to create a master sign program and to allow for one of the monument signs within that master sign program to exceed 6 feet in height. Shown here is just a quick rendering that shows the new facade of Stater Brothers with their new corporate branding. Within the sign program, there are 3 sign types specified, and the recommendation from staff is that the anchor grocery tenant may choose any of the 3 sign types, however, the standard tenants would be limited to sign type 3, which is the halo illuminated signs. The freeway-oriented sign would also be limited to this sign type 3 by staff recommendation. There's a condition of approval 4.13 that follows the recommendation from Design Review Subcommittee to both have halo illumination and a bronze coloring for that. This is a depiction of that rebuilt monument sign. Currently, there are 2 different types of monument signs, and so this would be mimicking the other existing monument sign. Both, however, would be refinished with a smooth stucco that's more emblematic of what the current remodel of the center is. So as proposed, it's 10 feet, which again is permitted with the approval of a discretionary sign permit. The panels that are shown are about 4 square feet each in area. At design review, there was a request for some additional information about routed lettering on monument signs. So this is just one example of what that would look like, where you have kind of a straight face on the sign with a cutout, as it were, of the lettering and signs that come through. So there was that was one of the comments, was a request for an example of that type of sign. There was a preference expressed for the bronze coloring on the freeway-oriented signage, and there was discussion, and it was determined to be appropriate that the height of that rebuilt monument sign. Staff did not receive any public comments. We did receive one comment letter from the applicant, which I believe has been placed in front of you, explaining their request to remove condition of approval 4.13, requiring that coloring specification, and I believe that the applicant is here and will be addressing that in their comments. In summary, the proposed master sign program establishes clear standards for signage at the site and would allow flexibility of color interior of the plaza, but consistency of style, which does not currently exist. Design review recommended bronze signs for the freeway-oriented signs. As I mentioned, the applicant does request removal of that condition of approval. Staff does support the project as conditioned. The recommendation then would be to determine the project categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to, I listed 2 sections here, 15301 for on-site signage, and then 15311 for that rebuilt accessory structure, and adopt resolution PC 19039 to approve that discretionary sign permit 18-546.
All right. Questions for staff? Michael?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Jonathan, did you you have some photos of the face of the building that would be facing the freeway where the new sign is proposed?
Yeah, I actually do. So let me hop through. Okay, so, you know, this is just a night photo that exists right now, or that I have in this presentation. So there's only one existing sign currently on this building that faces the freeway. That you can see that one on the left image. On the right is just a sample of the night illumination inside of the plaza.
So the one on the left would be facing what may soon be, at some point, the tire center, the tire, discount tire.
Oh.
Correct me if I'm.
Sorry, could you
That went away.
Oh, well, I mean, that direction. So it'd be facing towards the 76 station.
So no new sign is proposed.
The replacement is that one right
Correct.
on the left.
That
That's on the face of the building that faces the 76 station.
It actually does. Oh.
It would be like north.
It's more facing north.
Okay, it does face north. Yes.
Okay. Nothing on the rear of the building.
So this this is on the rear of the building. If you pull up your, let me hop to our, see if I have elevations shown here. I don't know that I have the site planning.
You do have a colored rendering of it.
Yeah, if you could get to, oh yeah, there we go. Page 12. Shows the elevations. So it's actually the south elevation that has the existing sign, and they're proposing their current branding on the, and Gabriel's going to help us with a drop down into Google Maps just to get the vicinity.
So it's this side here, right in the back. So
Correct.
Yeah, it's
Correct.
freeway,
Yes.
the freeway oriented.
Okay.
There you go.
There it is. Okay. Very good. That's perfect. All right. Thank you. And question about the new logo that the applicant is proposing. Is that brand new?
Could we switch back to the PowerPoint, Gabriel? Okay. So I wasn't able to speak with the applicant before the meeting, but I did do a little bit of quick hunting. It looks like they filed the trademark application in September for this new trademark. So the status that's shown is just a new application filed. So I don't know that it's been finalized at this point from what I could see online. But that was a third-party website, so it's, I would say, semi-official.
Okay. How much detail was involved in that application that you could see it? Was it red? Did they specify that it's red?
The image provided with the application was red.
Okay. But it's not protected yet?
From what I could tell, that application had not been completed yet.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Don?
Yeah, you had a question. You say that this master sign program, which is first for this shopping center, is nearly identical to the one next door. What are the differences? Do you happen to have that on top of your head?
Sure.
I mean, with that
Yeah. Differences would primarily be, one, that Ocean View Plaza has more existing freeway signage. But the standards of the sign type are exactly the same, so they still would have the sign type 1, 2, 3, and staff's recommendation is the same, that the anchor grocery stores would be permitted to take their pick of those sign types, and the remainder of the tenants would go with the sign type 3, the halo illumination. They are not proposing within that any alteration to their existing monument signs. They are proposing, and again, that's not part of the application tonight, but they're also removing a structure, a sign wall structure that's just for, you're probably familiar with it, it's arched openings that the purpose of that is just to have elevated signs, so they're proposing to remove that. So a few of those things are just discussed in the geography of where the signs are, but as far as the typology, they're identical.
Zen?
Yes, Jonathan. If this new sign is going to be installed, it wouldn't be considered a change of copy, is it?
So we would consider this a change of copy, yes.
It's not the same design.
Correct. I did spend some time reviewing discussion on that from council back in 2016. There were a couple of meetings that discussed this topic and policy of freeway-oriented wall signs, and changes of trademark, et cetera, were something that they intended to be included within the change of copy.
Okay, thanks.
Just to clarify, I keep getting these two names confused. The Ocean View Plaza, the other one.
Correct.
That's going before the ZA tomorrow?
Correct.
Okay, so we're safe in talking about that application because it's not going to be before the Planning Commission, correct?
Correct. It will not be before the Planning Commission.
And do I understand, this is kind of unusual, you have the same owner, they're actually kind of sort of combining these. When this process was started, when these applications were started, was it the same owner or two different owners for these properties?
It was the same owner when
It was the
this.
same owner. Okay. So, all right. I'm a little, okay. The anchor store signage, which is internally illuminated, those are the one stores we're saying they have the option to be internally illuminated, correct?
Correct.
Internally illuminated signs, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, in architectural overlay areas, we don't allow internally illuminated signs, is that correct?
So we do have specified allowances for how signs can be illuminated within the architectural overlay, and it does reference a preference for things such as gooseneck and halo illumination. But even neon signs are permitted within the architectural overlay with a discretionary sign permit. So I don't think that it's something that would be considered out of the allowance of discretionary sign permit.
Okay, not a preference, but not outside.
Correct.
Not outside the lines, all right. All right, I think that's it for me right now. Michael, do you have another one?
Yes. So just to be clear, we're considering this a change of copy.
Correct.
We could reference the discussion we had about the Denny's sign, where we talked about whether or not Denny's wanted to change to a new logo, as long as they were within that envelope, that was fine. Is that what we're looking at here? Is just the envelope is not going to change, and they're going with their new logo? Okay. The applicant is requesting that we remove this condition for the halo illumination. What was staff's intention by doing that, and does staff see over time a correction of that phase to be more consistent with the standards we have in the city? Is that the intention?
Yeah, the intention would be predominantly following design review's recommendation, which is to try to be consistent with prior approvals, such as at the outlets and other applications that have discussed signage to go in that direction of consistency. So when the approval at the outlets came about, a part of that was a recommendation out of the EIR that was done that indicated that maintaining a single color would be a preferred alternative, essentially. And so following, although that is a different project, following that logic of trying to go for a uniform aesthetic citywide in that regard seems to have been the direction of design review and planning commission.
Okay, and so maybe this question would be for our attorney regarding the protections under trademark.
Are we in discussion yet, or are we still asking?
No, we're
still questions.
Staff. Maybe you could answer this. I'm thinking maybe Mel better, but if there are no protections granted yet, are they still protected? In other words, if we wanted to see a different color there, could we really stand behind that and enforce that?
I'm going to defer to Mel.
Without protections yet?
Yeah, so that isn't a question that I'm aware of having been answered by the courts, but I certainly wouldn't want to have a test case on that. I mean, if this is their applied for logo, then that's their logo. And the case law is very clear that we cannot dictate a color for a logo other than the color that's used for their logo. For example, Blockbuster Video, may it rest in peace, that's a seminal case. A city tried to have a color change to the actual Blockbuster logo, couldn't do that. It's not protected yet, apparently. I doubt a court would side with us if we were to force them to go with a blue logo or a green logo versus a red logo, even though it isn't yet protected.
Okay. I was thinking aesthetic zoning for that same case that I read, happened to bring it up and read that that would have been applicable if there were not federal protections. And that's what the language, at least the language I read, was specific to that federal protection, if it was in existence. But in
Yeah,
this
but
case,
it's in the process of being protected. I'm not sure I'd want to push those boundaries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jason?
Yeah, just a quick question for clarification. Will we be requiring, if we were to approve condition 4.13, that if they change the sign on the freeway facing component to this new copy here, that will need to be bronze with backlit?
Correct.
Okay. And I think there's also state trademark protection too. Just once it was put into the use of commerce, it may give them protection there outside of the federal.
And if I can just chime in real quick on these issues and on this condition. So the condition as drafted does not dictate that their logo be put in bronze. It's that any copy that's freeway oriented or freeway facing on that side would be bronze, meaning that if they wanted to go with Times New Roman font or a Cambria or whatever you want to put from Word, right, that would be bronze. We cannot dictate that their logo be anything other than the approved or trademarked color pursuant to case law.
So if I understand what you're saying that the way that this is worded, saying anything, any sign that goes up there regardless is the dark bronze. That's what the condition says.
That's correct.
But we can't call out their logo in particular, that has to be.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's correct. I mean, look, it's not the most conservative approach, but this is just like the outlets. Now, the outlets chose to put logos up there. That was their choice. They could have put anything up there. The Puma sign could have been, again, PUMA in Cambria. They chose to have the jumping Puma along with their trademarked logo in bronze. Leaping.
Did you have a
Thank
question
you.
regarding the signage?
I did, so clarification again, if you would. So we're talking about protections in place here for logos and signage. How about placement? Say, for example, it's the commission's wish to not have a sign there, and we decide up here that we don't even want a new sign at all. We're not talking about the color of it, the look of it at all. We're talking about whether or not it even exists at that part of the building. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's take as an example a brand new center, right? So the city has the right to dictate the number of signs, the size of signs. There's no trademarked right to the number of signs or the size of signs. Going back again to Blockbuster, no longer around. A city could dictate that the sign be a certain size and only one sign, even if there were 4 sides of a building exposed to streets. There's no issue with that.
Thank you.
Okay. Zen?
Yeah, Johnson, is the applicant okay with the removal of type 2 construction?
I'm going to let the applicant respond to that. We have discussed that, but I'd prefer that they discuss their preference on that condition.
Well, if there's no more questions for staff, I'll ask the applicant if they'd like to speak. So, would the applicant like to address the planning commission? Sure. Great.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kyle Godat. I'm from Brixmor. Brixmor is the property owner for Plaza by the Sea and Ocean View Plaza. Brixmor's owned Ocean View Plaza for some time, and Plaza by the Sea was acquired in 2017, excuse me. And since that time, we've invested a tremendous amount of money in it, and actually we have a fairly substantial remodel going on right now to include the Stater Brothers. So we're really excited about how that's turning out. And the timing is good with what Stater Brothers is doing with their brand. I wanted to mention, I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to work with staff in San Clemente. They've been very helpful and very collaborative, and we sincerely appreciate it because we're making big investments in the city, and it's a good group of people to work with. So sincerely appreciate that.
We appreciate the feedback on them.
Yeah,
as
you
well.
bet. I put my thoughts in the letter that I submitted after the conditions were issued. We feel strongly that that it's an undue hardship to ask our tenants to change what is essentially an existing condition today. They came to our center with the opportunity to place brand and copy visible from the freeway, and it's very difficult for us as owners to ask them to change that or eliminate it as we go forward. Branding is how they speak to their customers, how they speak to the community, and in this case, we're making a substantial remodel at Plaza by the Sea, and Stater Brothers is joining us in rolling out a new logo and brand, and we're essentially limiting their opportunity to put their new logo on the backside of the building. My fear, our fear, is that tenants at Plaza by the Sea and Ocean View Plaza will choose to not touch those signs because they have their branded copy, rather than upgrade them to new lighting or new logos or whatnot in the future, and we'll be stuck with signs that potentially are out of date, not lit as well, and things like that. So we feel strongly that we are asking for the city's support in helping us maintain a healthy center and supporting these tenants to communicate to their customers. That's what I have.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Zen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was asking about whether you're okay with the removal of the type 2 construction.
And that's a type 2 illumination, right?
That's a construction with both push-through and backlit. I remember that during the meeting you said you don't intend to use that.
Yeah, we would be, we could accept the elimination of type 2. We're less concerned with illumination than we are with the tenants being able to use their color. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will then open the public hearing on this. I'm sorry, did you have more?
One minor thing.
Yes.
The applicant for Stater Brothers is here, or the representative for Stater Brothers
Oh,
is
if
here.
the
Would it be
representative
possible
to
for
speak?
him to speak as well?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Come on up.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Robin Bell with Architectural Design and Signs out in Corona, California, 1160 Railroad Street. I am the sign fabricator and designer for all of the Stater Brothers that are being rebranded right now. We've got 15 of them that we've got under our belt. We have another 200 that we've got to get done before the next 2 years. The question about the trademark, it's kind of an odd thing, but supposedly you have to roll out and then it makes it go live, and then you can get the trademark approved or something along those lines. And so that it's kind of in limbo right now, but it is in the process of being done. Currently, if you're familiar with Laguna Woods or Tustin Legacy, those centers now have been upgraded to their new branding. Something I wanted to kind of, this couldn't be the worst time that somebody would want, when you're in the middle of doing a big branding change like this, someone to come in and say, we want to change your logo, and we're going to make it bronze, and we're going to make your halo illumination. And you're in an existing center. It's not the same as the outlets. When those people signed their lease at the outlets, they knew what they were getting. Stater Brothers feels like they're getting the goalpost changed on them here. They have their existing red illuminated letters. They want exactly the same thing, except for they're coming in with a much thinner stroke letter, not as bold as what it was before, and probably 40 square feet smaller than what was before. And then when I asked them, what would you like me to address the commission? Was there anything? And they said, yeah, Robin, our logo is red, it's not bronze, it's not brown, and we're internally illuminated. That's what we want. We've spent a lot of money on focus groups and shopping carts and branding for software upgrades and receipts and bags and TV advertisement and trucks and trailer rigs and maintenance trucks, and it goes on and on and on. And I mean, I get it. I understand. That's what they want. And the idea was, if this was your business and this is, you're proud of it, and you've got it all together, and it's taken you 3 years to get here, and then somebody says, we think maybe bronze is the way to go, and change it on you 15 stores into it, that's the digger, I'm not sure if I'm going to say the right word, but the watering down now of your branding. And they're just not, it kind of gives them heartburn a little bit. In my conversations with staff or with the planner, it seemed that they were kind of very neutral. They were indifferent to whether that had to be a bronze or halo illuminated, or they can just have their regular sign that they have, just with their new logo. So I wanted to kind of throw that out to you. I didn't think this was going to be as big of a maybe an issue that it might be. We're just to remove that condition. I mean, they're one sign, their only sign on the back of that building in that project. Anyways, thanks, appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Bell? Okay. Then I will open the public hearing on this item. And do we have any cards for this? And having no cards, I will close the public hearing for this item, and I will open this up for Planning Commission discussion. Michael?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think, Jonathan, great job on this presentation, and I'd like to thank the applicant for these nice exhibits, very clear to read, and I definitely appreciate the applicant's comment on the importance of protecting the logo and the integrity of it, and all that's connected to it. But I wanted to speak to that, and that is that we have a process in the city, and it's a design review, and we give an opportunity for an applicant to have sort of an informal discussion with folks from the city that have an interest in care and the aesthetic experience here. And staff's report recommendation also holds to that, and staff's comment about the integrity and over time correction to meet the objectives that we have here in the city. So when we talk about a certain design for a sign, it's because it's a citywide protocol. It's what we want to do here. So we have conflict. We have two entities that want something, and when that happens, it doesn't always work out for the best for just one of those. It often is a compromise, and it may be a reasonable one at that. And I think that with all that said, I turn it back to the commission that, hearing everything, I came out thinking that maybe we should take a harder stance on this, but the more I listen to the applicant, the more I think about this, to the point that it is smaller, it is thinner, it's much cleaner, it's certainly going to be an improvement. I'd like to see some continuity on that face. It really is, in my opinion, a bit of an eyesore with all the colors. Considering what we're trying to do in the city, this is one of those gray areas. It'd be tough to change this one, and I don't know that it would be that much better in bronze, to be honest. So I'm going to have to kind of pull back my original position on this and go with supporting this part of the project. The rest of it, I think, is well done. We have clearly seen the applicant has listened to Design Review Subcommittee's recommendations. There have been multiple meetings, especially the monument sign to the north that has been raised. I think it's going to open up that line of sight for vehicular traffic exiting and entering the parking lot. I think that's going to be an improvement. And I'm happy to see improvements happening to this property, ongoing as we speak today. It's definitely a better experience, and it's looking like it's continuing to improve. So I'm in support of the project.
Okay. Zen?
Overall, I like the package. I appreciate the applicant's the willingness to remove the type 2 construction, because I believe it will reduce the light pollution when you have both push-through lighting as well as a backlit halo lights, and make it really busy and bright. So with that gone, I'm happy. Regarding the freeway-oriented sign, I'm going to support removal, the condition to have it to be bronze. But I will insist that there got to be some improvement. I believe if we change it to halo light, that will be an improvement. And if it's smaller, it's an improvement. Considering the fact that I think the applicant has a good point in the letter that the signs are facing west, so it's in no one's ocean view. And I also looked around on the Google map and I found that across the freeway, there's a very limited amount of residential properties looking toward this signage. Most of the properties are commercial. There are a few apartments there, but they're behind the tree, behind the berm. So the impact to especially residents are very limited. So for that reason, I'd like to support the removal of the bronze color. But we'll keep it as a halo lit sign. So that's my position. Thank you.
Okay. Don?
Yeah, I've read through the package here, and I appreciate what Brixmor is doing with both their centers and this one, and updating this one, and other things that are coming in progress, for where the old restaurant is and what you're doing next door and connecting them. You've done a lot of good work, and I appreciate that. And I like the overall, the sign package is brought forth since this shopping center never has had a master sign approval. But I'm going to take the opposite side of the fence on this freeway-oriented sign. It was mentioned in design review back in October, and I think a lot of the familiar faces were in that meeting, and it was okay then. And a month later, I guess they generated this letter 2 days ago with a concern about it. We have kind of established a standard freeway-oriented signs being bronze halo lens. I mean, the outlets probably drove that. It was 10 years of litigation and the heartburn and lawsuits out of that drove the current sign ordinance, which prohibits all freeway-oriented signs. So this one happens to be grandfathered along with their stores next door. So they get to keep a sign. But I think with this upgrade and this change for consistency with freeway-oriented signs, which are down the street, I think the DRSC comment, and I was looking through the memos, I wasn't there, but I think some of you were, recommended that, and I think I would hold with that recommendation that bronze halo lit is a classy, better showing. Of their 200 stores, they have one a little bit different. I'm sure they could stand that with all the rest of their brand on their shopping carts and everything else. So my feeling is to go with staff recommendation on the bronze sign for consistency as we've upgraded our freeway experience here up and down the road.
Okay, thank you. Jason?
So I support the project here. Echo Don's comments, welcome addition. I'm looking forward to Rose's being open again. That's been a hardship on my my two boys, although Cafe Rio made us happy. I think I'm going to fall in line with what Commissioner Wu has stated here. When I think back to the outlets, the concern that we had at the time was that we had a very high concentration of potential signs right next to each other, whether that was to the city attorney's point, text, or the jumping/leaping puma, or some other logo or just text that was written there. And so what we didn't want to see was, in very close proximity with each other, different types of I guess, visual detractions there, especially to people that we're looking across. And in this instance, we have one logo, one sign, and I don't know if the insistence upon the bronze color is necessary if I use the same analysis that I used when I was looking at the outlets. I do think that the halo backlit is important, and I could certainly appreciate the applicant and Stater Brothers comments that you guys would like to have the illuminated signs. In my day job, I have to fight that stuff all the time, and I would always prefer to have a internally illuminated sign, but sometimes I just have to take what I get, and a halo illuminated sign is better than no sign. So, I think that's a happy medium. I want to be very clear that when I make the determination that I'm making here, I'm not making that determination for signs in the future, and as I've distinguished it from the signage that we had at the outlets where you have multiple signs, I can see other projects in this city that may come up for sign permits in the future that might have the propensity for having multiple signs in close proximity to each other, and it may be in the city's interest to mandate that those are all bronze colored in nature, right? So in this case, there's one sign, and so it's easy to make, or it's easier to make the determination that you don't need to have bronze as the color. So I would support, if a majority of the commission here would support that, removing the bronze color from the special use condition, which I think is literally, it would just say, the new face shall be illuminated with halo illumination. You'd literally eliminate the bronze, but that's, that would be me and Commissioner Wu that are in that camp right now, so I'd leave it to our chair to determine if there's a majority of that persuasion or not.
I think it's worth remembering, taking a step back here, and I know, you've told a narrative about your customer, and I certainly understand that. People want their logos, and they've got their corporate history. The city has, you're kind of new to this, but our city has a very long history of, issues with freeway signage. It's been a long, many years of battle, you might say, and when there is a potential for a new freeway sign, there's can be quite a bit of conflict about that. I know in your letter you wrote about impacting the ocean views, and that's true, but it's not the only reason why the city tries to issue freeway signs. It also has to do with, many cars on the freeway. People in the city drive the freeways every day, and the more multicolored signs from the freeway, there's a feeling, we have been told by many members of the public, that it's a negative, has a negative effect on the community or their experience of the community. No one is certainly saying to remove your freeway sign. It's grandfathered in, so you get to keep it. If it were a brand new store, I tend to think, just given our history and our rules, it would be a pretty hard sell. And in fact, there's the Estrella Shopping Center around the corner. That was another big episode of a freeway sign, and a lot of conflict about it. They ended up without a freeway sign and with a couple of the monument signs, 10-foot monument signs, because they have such a huge setback there, even farther than your guys' is, I believe. And they didn't have the freeway signage. In this application, what we're asking for, kind of the big things are to have a colored freeway sign, to have an internally illuminated sign for the anchor store. This being in a gateway area, which is kind of equivalent to an architectural overlay area, and also to have a discretionary increase in the size of one of the monument signs, and there's already 2 monument signs there. To me, all those things together don't really. It's hard to make the finding, this first finding, that it fulfills the intent of the design elements of the general plan and the city's design guideline. There's a lot there. There's a lot that was allowed in the 70s that we simply don't allow now. That, a lot of communities have sort of matured and refined their standards and that sort of thing, and of course that's happened with us too. So with the bronze colored sign, one of my fears is consistency. That if we say, okay, you don't need to, when it's time to make a change to the signage, if we don't say that if you have signage, this is a consistent way to do it in a more subtle and kind of elegant way, I think we've discovered, then other freeway signage is going to essentially be allowed. And that's kind of contrary to the direction that the community has told us that they have wanted to go in, at least during my time on the Planning Commission. So I have a concern about that. So I would prefer my thinking is I can't really make this finding for all those things. Those are a lot of changes, kind of keeping a lot of what was allowed in the 70s, frankly. On the other hand, if it's always better, of course, if the applicant, agrees to all the conditions or is in favor of all the conditions, I should say. But if there's a little less that's done, I think it can be appropriate. So, for instance, if we go with the bronze signs, it sort of says, okay, now that's a little more community standard. So having a larger monument sign is not inappropriate in that context. That sort of thing. That I feel better about that in terms of having this fit into the community and having the master sign program as a whole, be in line with the general plan and the city's design guidelines. So I don't know, that might stimulate some discussion amongst my colleagues. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. But is there any further discussion? Actually, Don, you've got your light on.
Well, yeah, I kind of agree with what you're coming up with, Chairman. You can argue on the second 10-foot monument sign and some other issues there. I also like to remind the commission the shopping center across the mall resulted in an ordinance change. We prohibited all freeway signs. Of course, they're like they're grandfathered. So we've had a pretty strict community guidance, I think, over the last 10 years on freeway-oriented signs that are highly restricted. And they're grandfathered, and that's fine. I'd like them to keep their signs, and that's why I feel very strongly that the bronze logo, everything's the same other than their color. They got a bronze logo that upgrades the community and consistent with what we've been approving. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And one comment I think was made earlier in the discussion about Denny's, we approve them not to change their logo. They keep what they have, but they can upgrade the technology. But the copy had to stay the same, even though they haven't done it down there. So we still see DENN and all the other ones down there. But anyway, I think that, Chairman, I agree with you, Chairman Rule, the direction of my feelings also.
Okay. Michael?
But just to be clear, that this is a change of copy, that determination has been made in this case, and that there are protections in place according to legal counsel, that there are protections the applicant has. So if the applicant wanted to hold ground on that, the applicant can do so and exercise their rights and go ahead and go the distance. We can certainly vote on it. That way, the applicant has already suggested that rather than changing it out, they're going to keep their old sign. I don't know that they would. So I'd like to know what we really can do up here and what that's going to look like. We can vote on anything, but in terms of what has been, stated to us by the applicant versus what we want, what do you think? What's your legal opinion on how much water this is really going to hold?
So if the question is how you can condition this freeway-oriented signage, what you can't do is require that the logo be a color other than what they've shown here. That's off the table. You certainly can allow for the logo as presented, right? That's very clear. And it's likely that you can require that any signage on that side of the building be bronze without dictating what kind of signage that is. Now, that approach has not been tested in the courts. It's a reading of the case law as exists, but that is an application of the case law. So those are kind of your options: to allow the logo as presented, to allow the existing signage, not to allow any signage, right? The current signage would be non-conforming, and when it comes down, it's down, period. Or to require what the condition here requires, which is any signage be bronze, regardless of what that signage looks like.
And Mal, we're down a couple of members today. We got 5 members here. Do we still require 4? I always forget on this. Do we still require 4 to pass?
It's a majority of your quorum.
Majority of quorum.
So
So 3.
tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for some reason I thought we were 4. Maybe that's an ordinance. So okay.
No, I think it's a general plan amendment needs 4.
Oh, maybe that was
Other
it,
than
yeah,
that, it's
that's where I got
single
confused, so, okay. All right, so I guess just to maybe summarize my position, I'm in favor of this as currently written. If we were to change a condition with the freeway sign, then I think that there's other conditions that we would need in order to make this more conforming. I would hope that maybe the applicant would see that and kind of see that, we're sort of the constraints that we're working under as well. But that's my position on it. Don, did you have your light on or not?
No, I reconsider.
Okay. Jason?
So do you want me to make a motion?
You may make a motion if you wish.
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution number PC 19039, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of San Clemente, California, approving discretionary sign permit 18546, a request to establish master sign program for an existing commercial center at 610-628 Camino de los Maros within a city gateway corridor.
Second.
Motion by Jason, second by Don. All in favor?
Wait, I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion. And I'd like to make a motion to amend a motion by removing the word bronze from 4.13. The new face shall have halo illumination.
I withdraw.
No, hold on. We have the motion for the permit, and now we've got a motion for an amendment to the permit.
That's correct.
I'd like to make a second amendment.
So the motion on the amendment by Jason, a second on the amendment by Wu?
No, I'd like to make I'd second the amendment. In addition, I'd like to make another amendment.
You're going to make this hard for me, huh?
To remove the type 2 construction with both halo and through lighting.
Is there a second to that, to Commissioner Wu's
I'll
amendment?
restate my motion.
Hold on. Let's do one thing at a time. Is there an amendment, is there a second to Commissioner Wu's second amendment? Excuse me, a second to Commissioner Wu's amendment.
I'll second that, or we can incorporate.
Okay, motion by Wu, second by...
And to be clear, we're going halo illumination, stays red.
Whatever color.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever they want, so red, blue.
Let's unwind this a little bit. So there's on the second amendment, on Commissioner Wu's amendment, we have a motion and a second. And your amendment, can you say it again, please? Make sure I didn't get it.
It's based on the base motion. It's based on the first motion with an additional condition that we remove the type 2 construction.
Remove the type 2 construction. Okay. Any discussion on that amendment?
I will be happy to restate my first amendment to include Commissioner Wu's statement, so you have the base motion and then you have an amendment, instead of having to have 3.
At second that, I will withdraw my second amendment because it's being incorporated into the amendment.
Okay, so we
So
no longer have that second amendment, so we
my
just have the amendment for striking the word bronze.
Second that.
And adding a condition that there will be no type 2 lighting construction, correct?
I seconded that.
Okay.
Somebody has to second his amendment.
No, he
No.
withdrew his, so we have.
He withdrew his, and he's remaking his amendment.
That's
correct.
And your
Okay.
amendment is striking the bronze.
Motion and a second.
Right.
Recording secretary, understand this.
So we're gonna make that all.
Motion and a second.
No, there's a motion, then there's an amendment to the motion. The amendment to the motion is to remove the bronze color requirement and also to add a condition that there be no type 2 lighting construction.
So, and that is, that amendment, Jason made the motion and Wu seconded for the amendment. Okay? Got that so far?
Okay, I have a question. How is this different from making a motion with amendments?
This is an amendment. If it passes, then that becomes the motion on the floor. If it fails, then the motion on the floor is still the motion on the floor.
So let's worry about the amendment first and
Okay.
see how that goes. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
So first is on the first amendment.
Yeah, there's no second amendment now, just a
Right.
first.
One amendment.
So it's
I
your
made
first
it.
and your second.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Any discussion on that amendment? Not? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
No?
I oppose.
So no. So we have, the amendment passes 3-2.
So that amendment now becomes the motion on the floor.
Right.
Wait a minute, 3-2.
That's right.
Two
So,
opposed?
2 opposed. Brown and Rulon opposed.
Okay, thank you.
And we're done.
Okay, so now we have a motion on the floor?
And now, once the amendment is approved, it's,
No.
The amendment's approved for the motion, for the main motion. Now we have to vote on the main motion.
And that main
The
motion?
resolution.
no.
Now we're voting on the resolution.
Once the amendment is approved, it comes with the basic motion. It's a basis motion with amendments.
No.
That's what you supported.
No,
No.
he
I
moved.
withdrew my
he moved-
second on the original motion. That's,
Did you?
I withdrew my second.
Okay, so here's what we have now. We have a
We have a motion that's not been seconded.
we have a motion that's not been seconded. An amended motion that's not been
That's
seconded.
right, so somebody needs to second the amended motion.
Your amended motion
The
was
amended motion, we
seconded
just
by
passed
me.
it.
No, the amendment.
That's now
Was
on the
seconded.
floor.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second. The-
Okay, so motion by Tally, second by Michael.
And the motion is the amended motion that we have now.
Yeah, the motion is,
Now we're voting on the same thing that we just voted.
we're voting on the resolution as amended by the amendment that just passed. That's what we're voting on.
With the new condition for the type 2.
Just to make it simple, the motion on the floor is a resolution as amended with the elimination of the word bronze from condition 4.13. There's lots of moving parts, but
And the
that's really what
addition
it boils
of
down to.
a
And the
condition.
addition and your addition of the type 2.
But wasn't that seconded by me and voted 3-2 just passed?
But that was
That
to
was-
amend the motion on the floor. That was what the motion was. It
We
wasn't
basically
actually
changed
passing.
that one condition as well.
So now we're voting on that.
Okay.
We did it the long way around, so.
Would you like me to call the question?
No, it's been called. We have a motion, we have
Way
we have a motion, and we have a second.
Okay.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No?
No.
We have Brown and Rulon opposed, everyone else in favor, so the motion passes. So, congratulations.
Made it more complicated.
Yeah, we did.
I don't get that.
Jason read it. Yeah.
All right, well done.
We have, under new business, there's no new business I'm aware of. Any old business? Reports of commissioners and staff. Does anyone have any reports? Jason?
I was unable to attend the Coastal Commission meeting last week because I was called out of town unexpectedly, unfortunately.
Just a couple things that I wanted to mention, I think, here in the reports, regarding the item that we just finished. I know that's kind of funny, the way that it came up, that it was kind of two separate applications, but because of the nature of this shopping center, and it's going to be connected, I think it would have been better, just kind of a note for staff, I think it would have been better to exercise your discretion and take these minor architectural permits and put them in front of the Planning Commission together with this, so that we would have looked at it all at once and as a whole. Then we could have, it would have been a higher guarantee of consistency, and we could have looked at this kind of, the project as a whole, because that's what it's becoming, is more of a whole project rather than two things. So I just kind of make an observation and a recommendation to staff that maybe in the future, this type of thing, not that we kind of get this thing all the time, but this type of thing might be a good place to exercise your discretion on those minor permits, so that we can kind of carry things through in a more consistent way, so. And also, with these bronze signs, and maybe this is less pertinent now, but this is something that we've been asking people for in various circumstances. If we want to do it in design review, or staff does it, I thought that we've been kind of referencing the outlet mall, saying, bronze in the same color as the outlet mall, or that sort of a thing. It might be good for staff to provide a kind of a clear, objective description of those kinds of signs. I'm sure that there's probably some technical description of the color and, some other characteristics of the signage. If we could have that and make that as part of a condition if we have a situation like this in the future, that might be something useful both for the applicant and for staff and for the Planning Commission going forward. So just a thought. Anything else with reports? If not, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn to the next regular meeting of the Planning Commission to be held on December 4th, 2019 at 6 o'clock in council chambers. The December 4th, 2019 study session was previously canceled due to a lack of business. Is there a second?
One question before we move on with that. If we wanted to have a study session in 2 weeks that started at 6, is there still a way to do that? I mean, is that a problem in terms of noticing and things like that? If we wanted, yeah.
No, that wouldn't be an issue. You would just identify that adjourning to the study session next week.
Well, we haven't scheduled yet. I'm just thinking.
In 2 weeks.
I'm just thinking, Katie and I have to get together and talk about, what we might want to do about the small cell ordinance and having a little more discussion with the Planning Commission. So if that study session is canceled, that might be an opportunity for us to do it at that point.
If I adjourn to the study session, then it's canceled later on, that's okay, right?
Yeah.
How about I'll amend my motion to adjourn to the study session at 6 o'clock unless canceled by the chair. Second.
Is that right? All right. Motion by Talley, second by Brown. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously.